The world didn't end with a bang. It unraveled thread by thread, each pulled by desperate hands clinging to dwindling reserves of oil. What began as tense diplomacy and trade disputes quickly escalated into something far darker. Borders hardened, alliances fractured, warships prowled the seas while satellite images revealed oil fields burning like funeral pyres. Then came the strikes. At first, they were surgical, detonations meant to intimidate, to warn. But fear is a poor counselor. And within days, the sky lit up with fire. Warheads screamed across continents, not at military bases, but at cities, at homes, at people. When the smoke finally settled and the silence returned, the world was no longer one of nations and borders. It was one of broken landscape of ash of echoes. The survivors didn't speak of victory. They spoke only of the long road ahead. In the wake of global collapse, as the last oil rigs ran dry and the skies dimmed with fallout, Earth's most powerful nations and corporations laid down their rivalries, not out of goodwill, but of necessity. Survival demanded unity, and from this fragile alliance emerged the United Colonial Nations, or UCN, an international coalition formed in desperation. With Earth's once bountiful resources exhausted and its ecosystems teetering on the edge of ruin, the UCN turned their eyes to the stars. The answer, they believed, lay beyond Earth's dying atmosphere, in the untouched minerals of distant moons, the frozen oceans of gas giants, and the promise of new worlds. Now, salvation would not come quickly. Colonization would require a fleet, vast, self-sustaining vessels capable of traversing the void and planting seeds of civilization among the stars. The blueprint was ambitious, the timeline daunting. 30 years of construction, 30 years of sacrifice, planning, and blind hope. Yet for a species on the brink, it was the only future worth building. While the United Colonial Nations spearheaded humanity's survival effort, it was clear from the beginning that public resources alone would not be enough. Colonization on an interstellar scale came with staggering costs. Costs even the UCN couldn't bear alone. And so, in the name of expedience and economic survival, they opened the stars to private investment. Under strict UCN oversight, corporations and sovereign states were permitted to fund and launch their own off-world expeditions. These ventures would remain, at least on paper, subject to UCN authority. In reality, the rules were fluid, defined by wealth, power, and influence. Among the corporate giants stepping into this new frontier, none cast a longer shadow than the Helghan Corporation. Built on energy monopolies and vast industrial refining operations, the Helghan grew fat on the bones of Earth's last century. When the call for colonization came, they were ready, with money, the firepower, and the ambition to carve out the world of their own. But the Helghan wasn't interested in mere survival. They sought dominion. To maintain order amid the growing chaos of interstellar expansion, the UCN established a strict framework for colonization. Every endeavor, be it corporate, governmental, or joint venture, required a license issued by the UCN's Colonial Oversight Bureau. These licenses came with a long list of stipulations: environmental impact protocols, resource sharing agreements, labor regulations, and above all, loyalty to Earth's centralized authority. Compliance was not optional. Those who deviated from these terms, whether by exploiting prohibited resources, violating planetary sovereignty, or engaging in unsanctioned militarization, faced severe consequences. First came fines, then economic sanctions. But when those proved ineffective, the UCN made it clear they were willing to go further. Armed intervention, while rare, was not off the table. In the void beyond Earth, UCN's reach was long, and its grip unyielding. Yet for some, the promise of untapped worlds and total independence was worth the risk. As the years passed and construction neared completion, the launch pads of Earth roared to life once more, not with the fire of war, but the engines of exodus. One by one, the colony ships departed Earth's atmosphere, vast titans of steel and promise, each carrying thousands of settlers, engineers, scientists, and security. Bound for the moons of Jupiter, the icy reaches of Saturn, and the scarred plains of Mars, these vessels retained humanity's final gamble, Diaspora into the stars born of not exploration, but of necessity. Each ship bore the markings of its sponsor. Some flew the banner of the UCN, symbols of the international cooperation and structured expansion. Others carried the colors of sovereign nations or mega corporations bound for worlds they intended to claim as their own. Among them, the Helghan convoy, black, angular, and heavily shielded, slipped into space with quiet precision. Its destination unpublicized, its intentions veiled behind layers of corporate secrecy. Earth grew quieter with each launch. The skies once filled with pollution, satellites now shimmered with the trails of outbound ships, hopeful arcs fleeing a dying world. The age of colonization had begun. Despite the triumph of launch day, the reality of colonization proved far more complex than the UCN anticipated. Dozens of colonies now scattered across the solar system, each with its own logistical needs, environmental challenges, and cultural frictions. The administrative demands surged beyond control. The UCN is still in its infancy, and neither the infrastructure nor the personnel to manage the tidal wave of requests, disputes, and emergencies that flowed in from the stars. Communications lagged, supplies were misallocated, reports went unread, and yet the colonies kept growing, outpacing their handlers back on Earth. Swamped and overstressed, the UCN resorted to blunt tools to maintain control. Economic penalties were the first line of defense. Heavy tariffs, revoked licenses, and trade embargoes that could cripple an outpost's ability to function. But when those failed, the velvet glove came off. The UCN's military arm, hastily expanded and rebranded as the Colonial Peacekeeping Forces, became the hammer. Gunships were dispatched to quell uprisings, seize illegal mining operations, or remind would-be rebels that the reach of Earth did not end at its atmosphere. In response to the mounting strain across the colonies, the United Colonial Nations commissioned a new military branch, the UCN Defense Force. It was envisioned as a stopgap, a temporary measure to stabilize frontier settlements until proper civil governments could take root. Drawn from elite military units across Earth's remaining superpowers, the UCNDF was equipped with cutting-edge technology, next-generation exosuits, orbital deployment systems, and AI-assisted command infrastructure. Its soldiers were among the best Earth had to offer. Disciplined, multilingual, trained to operate in zero atmosphere or on hostile terrain without hesitation. In the early years, their presence brought order. Pirates were swept from asteroid belts, rogue miners were detained and reprocessed into the labor system. Quarantines were enforced, and unauthorized terraforming halted before it could compromise environmental protocols. On the surface, the UCNDF was a symbol of peace through strength, but beneath the polished veneer lay a bitter truth. The Defense Force was never meant to last. Its creation was rushed, its logistics stretched thin. And as more colonies came online, the UCN struggled to justify pouring resources into a standing military force, rather than infrastructure, horticulture, or healthcare. Whispers began to circulate about overreach, about heavy-handed crackdowns, about whether the UCNDF served the people or simply the interests of Earth. Even among the stars, temporary solutions had a way of becoming permanent, especially when backed by firepower. 10 years after the first great exodus from Earth, the long-haul colonies emerged from the void into the Alpha Centauri system. It was humanity's first true step beyond Sol, a leap not just of distance, but of ambition. The system, just over 4 light-years from Earth, was chosen with purpose. Positioned between the homeworld and the more distant, still theoretical colony sites, Alpha Centauri was to become a keystone, a logistical and political hub that would bind the far reaches of human expansion together. A frontier capital, a gateway to the stars. Initial surveys confirmed what early probes had hinted at. Around Alpha Centauri B, they found a harsh, rocky world, rich in minerals and ideal for heavy industry. If settlers could withstand its unforgiving terrain and frequent tectonic unrest, around Alpha Centauri A, orbiting in the Goldilocks zone, was a jewel, a lush, Earth-like world covered in a dense green forest, fresh water seas, and a breathable atmosphere, a second cradle for humanity. The 2 worlds were designated for immediate colonization. The first, named Viridian Prime, will serve as a paradise world, a symbol of hope and renewal. The second, Proxima Terminus, was chosen for infrastructure and manufacturing. Ugly, but essential. Both were placed under direct UCN oversight, though the ink on the charters was barely dry before private interests began staking silent claims. As the first domes were raised and terraforming engines ignited, no one could yet predict just how central Alpha Centauri would become, not only to humanity's survival, but to its greatest conflicts. The dissolution of the UCN Defense Forces came not with a bang, but a scandal. Whispers of corruption had long haunted its command structure. Unaccounted resources, brutal crackdowns on civilian populations, contracts awarded to phantom suppliers. Then came the failures. Delayed responses to colony distress calls, botched peacekeeping operations, and entire supply fleets lost without explanation. For a force once hailed as humanity's finest, the fall was swift and merciless. Under mounting pressure from both the colonies and Earth's own fractured political blocs, the United Colonial Nations enacted sweeping reforms. The UCN Defense Force was officially disbanded, its name quietly erased from the official records, its leadership purged or imprisoned. In its place, a new entity was formed, the United Colonial Army. Unlike its predecessor, the UCA would be lean, professional, and answerable not to bloated oversight committees, but to a streamlined military council composed of both Earth-based and colonial representatives. It was a compromise, both of necessity and desperation. A single unified military force tasked with defending humanity's scattered domains. The UCA Navy was the first branch to come online. Composed of salvaged UCNDF warships, retooled exploration vessels, and a new generation of modular dreadnoughts, the Navy was charged with safeguarding trade routes, controlling colonized systems, projecting force where diplomacy failed. It was a fleet forged not just in steel, but in lessons, many of them written in blood. To the citizens of Earth and her colonies, the UCA represented a fresh start. To others, it was simply the same hammer painted in different colors. But either way, the message was clear. It would be order among the stars. It began with a solar flare, violent, unexpected, and far stronger than predicted. A roiling plume of stellar fire erupted from Alpha Centauri A, destroying navigational arrays and blinding long-range sensors across the sector. For most vessels, the flare was a passing hazard, a momentary scramble of data and systems. But for one fleet, it was a death knell. The Akron, Triumph, Pacifica, Jericho, Seraph, and Harbinger. 6 colony ships traveling in formation en route to the far edge of Centauri system disappeared from the tracking imagers in a single burst of static. One moment they were there, beacons pulsating steadily through the dark, and the next, they were gone. Desperate attempts to re-establish contact followed. Long-range hails, post-coded transmissions, drone dispatches, nothing. The last telemetry received, fractured and corrupted, painted a grim picture. Cascading system failures, reactor instability, and what one gargled voice described as uncommanded course deviation, something's pulling us, before the feed dissolved into noise. The UCA declared all hands lost. It was a blow unlike any other. Thousands of lives, years of preparation, entire colonies gone without a trace. Families mourned, flags were lowered, and the media called it the Centauri Silence. Officially, the incident was attributed to electromagnetical interference and unshielded infrastructure, an engineering oversight, nothing more. But in the quiet corners of Iridium Prime and among the engineers on Proxima Terminus, rumors began to spread. Some whispered of sabotage, others of unknown gravitational anomalies, and some, those who studied the fragments of the last message, frame by frame, claimed they heard something beneath the static. The disappearance of the Akron fleet cast a long shadow across the stars, but its impact was felt more bitterly in the UCN's ledgers. The loss of 6 colony ships didn't just mean the death of thousands, it meant financial ruin. The logistics and materials of years of preparation gone, and with Earth itself still barely afloat, there was no appetite. There was no budget. Smaller missions would consider, but projections were grim. Without overwhelming support, the odds of survival beyond Sol dropped to unacceptable levels. And so, for the first time since the founding of the UCN, desperation overruled pride. The Alpha Centauri settlement rights, the crown jewel of human expansion, were put up for a private bidding. The announcement sparked outrage. Headlines across Skull screamed betrayal. Politicians decried the move as a surrender to corporate greed. But in the back rooms and encrypted channels, the bidding war began in earnest. Mega corporations, consortiums, and entire planetary blocks entered the fray, offering everything from resource pledges to defense contracts. In the end, there could be only one winner: the Helghan Corporation. Their victory was announced with clinical precision. Exclusive right to settle, develop, and administer Alpha Centauri for a period of no less than 75 years, with profit-sharing agreements and regulatory oversight to be reviewed upon milestone completions. The agreement was barely finished before accusations started to fly. Whistleblowers claimed the bid was rigged. Leaked communications hinted at bribed officials, forged cost assessments, and pre-authorized approvals from key UCN representatives. Some point out that the Helghan's own colonial fleet, long rumored, never confirmed, was suspiciously close to launch readiness. Others noted the involvement of the Interplanetary Banking Guild, which had extended Helghan a staggering line of credit in exchange for a 10% cut of future colonial profits. Yet nothing was proven. Investigations stalled, records disappeared, and the UCN, battered and broke, moved on. For the public, the story became just another grim chapter in the long decline of Earth's idealism. For Helghan, it was a triumph decades in the making. The stars were theirs. The voyage to Alpha Centauri was long and fraught with silent suffering. Though the Helghan Corporation's colonial fleet boasted state-of-the-art cryo-sleep technology, what the engineers nicknamed ice nod chambers, no system was perfect. En route malfunctions, biological failure, and unknown stress responses caused 2% of the would-be colonists to die in their sleep, never waking to see the world they had left behind. Their losses were recorded, memorialized, and quietly buried in corporate data archives. When the fleet finally reached the first destination, a rocky mineral world orbiting Alpha Centauri A, there was a flicker of hope. The ship descended into orbit, scanning the surface and initiating atmospheric sweeps. But that hope quickly gave way to harsh truths. The planet, named Helghan by corporate decree, was brutally hostile. Radiation storms flared unpredictably. The air, though technically breathable with filtration, was laced with corrosive particles. The native biosphere was barren. No flora, no fauna, no water-bearing life. It was a dead world, rich in energy resources, but devoid of sustenance or comfort. The colonists were dismayed. Helghan's leadership, ever calculating, made a strategic choice. A prefabricated orbital station was deployed to remain in orbit, a logistics platform and command center to manage long-term resource extraction. A small group of engineers and workers volunteered to remain behind, seeding the planet with automated refineries, fusion turbines, and atmospheric scrubbers. The rest of the fleet, low on supplies and morale, took a final gamble. With dwindling fuel and rations, they pushed deeper into the system, towards the second world, an emerald globe orbiting Alpha Centauri B. When they saw it, they wept. Green with thick forests, vast oceans, and a vibrant atmosphere, it was everything Helghan was not. A new Eden. In honor of the man whose ambition had led them across the stars, they named it Vecta, after Philip Vekta, CEO and principal architect of the Helghan's Corporation's colonial ascent. The ships descended with reverence. The cities were not built, they were planted, woven into the land with towering white architecture and gleaming transit hubs. Vecta was the prize, and Helghan the engine that would fund it. But the seeds of division had already been sown. One planet of hardship, one of abundance, and only one future. The first Helghan ships touched down on the surface of Vecta in 2129. It was as though the stars had finally answered humanity's cries. The land was rich with life, rolling meadows, vast freshwater lakes, and endless canopies of green stretching across continents. The air was warm and breathable, the seasons mild, and the soil astonishingly fertile. After years of loss, silence, and hardship, the settlers stepped into sunlight, saw not a hostile frontier, but a paradise. Between 2129 and 2140, 12 colonies were founded across the planet's most temperate zones. Each settlement bore the ambition and order of the Helghan's design. Efficient, sleek, and modular, capable of rapid growth but deeply embedded in the land. Unlike the bleak mining enclaves of Mars or the atmospheric domes of Luna, Vecta's colonies needed no shielding. Crops could be sown directly into the earth, rivers could be dammed and harnessed, livestock thrived. Within a decade, Vecta achieved the unthinkable. Agricultural independence. Food production not only met demand, it surpassed it. Colony exported goods back to the orbital supply routes servicing Helghan's industrial platforms. For the first time in recorded colonial history, a new world was not a burden on its parent system. And at the heart of it all rose Vecta City. Built on the banks of the Saraluan River, in the center of the first terraformed archaeology zone, Vecta City was a jewel of the New World. The city became both a cultural and political capital. Skyscrapers of mirrored glass rose beside botanical towers and community gardens. Each street was a promise of what the future could look like. To the Helghan elite, Vecta was proof of corporate destiny fulfilled. But beneath the polished streets and sunlit plazas, tension simmered. Helghan, orbiting far away in the harsh life Alpha Centauri, had paid the price for this Eden. Its people laboring in the dust, feeding the engines of paradise they would never live in. And paradise, as ever, was never meant to be shared equally. As the first wave of colonies matured into functioning societies, the logistical cracks in the UCA's centralized command structure became impossible to ignore. The dream of a unified Earth-led defense force coordinating security across dozens of light years quickly shattered underneath the weight of the slow communications, the centralized infrastructure, and unpredictable colonial politics. The UCA couldn't respond fast enough. Pirate incursions went unanswered. Trade disputes escalated into violence. Smuggling, black market, arms trading, and even anti-UCN militias began to take root in the shadows of distant colonies. The sprawling interstellar web was fraying at the edges. In response, the United Colonial Nations initiated one of its most ambitious reforms to date, the Interplanetary Strategic Alliance, or ISA. Rather than attempt to direct military control from Seoul, the ISA concept restructured the whole colonial defense doctrine entirely. Under this system, each star system, or colonial zone, of sufficient size, will establish its own independent ISA command. These commands are locally funded and staffed by colonial administrations, but receive standardized training, equipment, and advisory support from the UCN. ISA duties were multifaceted: policing of local habitats, orbital stations and trade lanes, revenue collection, local defense. Crucially, ISA command did not fall under the authority of the UCA. Each operated independently, answering directly to civilian UCN appointees within their respective star systems. The result was a patchwork of semi-autonomous defense forces, bound by treaty but governed by the local interest. Budgets and manpower varied wildly between systems. Wealthier colonies like Vecta built formidable ICA forces, complete with capital-class ships and extensive orbital surveillance networks. Poorer systems scraped together what they could, converted cargo haulers and militia crews with second-hand weapons. The first official ISA commands: ISA Alpha Centauri and ISA Altair. Alpha Centauri, flush with Helghan corporate funding and the agricultural prosperity of Vecta, quickly fielded a capable force. Altair, anchored by the aquatic research colonies of Algier, took a more measured approach, favoring sensor nets, interceptor drones, and long-range monitoring over firepower. Though hailed by UCN officials as a necessary decentralization, critics warned of the future fragmentation. The independence of each ISA command, they argued, created silos of power, some of which might one day serve their creators more loyally than the UCN itself. But in the chaos of the early expansion age, ideals mattered less than the results. And for now, the ISA delivered order. The early years of the Vectan colony were anything but idyllic. Though the planet itself was generous, lush, fertile, and temperate, the realities of interstellar settlement remained harsh. Crop blights from unfamiliar soil chemistries, equipment failures, and disease outbreaks pushed the colony to the brink more than once. There were winters when rations ran low and entire districts were quarantined. There were riots, even mutinies. But the settlers endured, under the ironclad guidance of the Helghan Corporation's Colonial Governance Board, and with a population hardened by survivalism and the corporate ethics of self-sustainability, the Vectan colony clawed its way from instability to security. Arcologies rose across the Central Plains. Automated agricultural sectors went online. Biofactories synthesized medicines. Vecta had not only survived, it has stabilized. And as it did, Helghan's true value revealed itself. While the surface of Helghan remained hostile and uninhabitable to long-term civilian life, its orbiting space station, Helghan Orbital Platform 1 or HOP-1, proved to be the corporation's greatest asset. Positioned perfectly within Alpha Centauri's core trade corridor, the station sat directly on the traffic artery between Earth and the outer colonies. It became a natural, logistical hub. Starships bound for the frontier stopped at HOP-1 to refuel supply and undergo maintenance. Dry dock facilities expanded rapidly. Orbital fuel tanks filled with Helghan processed energy materials were sold at astronomical prices. Specialized tankers began regular runs between the industrial sites on Helghan's surface and the emergent colonies of Altair and beyond. Economics shifted almost overnight. Helghan, once a cautionary tale of colonial hardship, became a keystone of interstellar commerce. The profits rolled in, first to pay for comfort goods, luxury imports, and advanced medical supplies for HOP-1's long-suffering personnel. But soon they funded much more. Expanded fabrication bays, shielded labs, security ships, a growing fleet of Helghan-owned and operated star frigates, all bearing the sigil of the rising corporate empire. Vecta provided stability, Helghan provided power. Together they formed a dual-core economy that began to rival entire systems in influence. And in time, some will come to say, in ambition. A revolutionary leap in communication technology redefined the relationship between the twin worlds of Vecta and Helghan. Thanks to the advancements in real-time entanglement-based data transfer, the once fragmented communication delay between the two planets was eliminated. For the first time, both worlds could speak, govern, and trade as one. Seizing the moment, the Vectan government announced the formation of Helghan Protectorate, a formal administrative union wherein both Helghan and Vecta would be governed directly from Vecta. Framed as a gesture of unity and efficiency, the arrangement streamlined governments, centralized economic flow, and tightened logistical cooperation between the two worlds. Under this new structure, Helghan's vast energy revenues, previously taxed and regulated through the ISA channels, were now funneled directly into Vecta's rapidly growing economic engine. In exchange, Vecta expanded its agricultural exports and luxury manufacturing shipments to Helghan, dramatically raising living standards on the otherwise harsh and industrialized world. The effect was immediate and profound. Employment soared to 95%. Public morale hit record highs. Trade between the worlds became seamless. To commemorate the union, a new emblem was unveiled. 3 interlinked arms, each inscribed with a single ideal: peace, justice, and freedom. It was adopted as official symbol of the Helghan Protectorate and adorned both military uniforms and civilian institutes alike. It came to represent not only economic success, but the vision of two worlds rising together, one providing strength, the other abundance. But while unity was the word on every diplomat's tongue, quiet questions lingered in the factories of Helghan and the halls of Vecta commerce. Whose justice? Whose peace? Whose freedom? For now, though, the banner flew high, and the stars watched silently. Riding a wave of growing autonomy and prosperity under the Helghan Protectorate, Vecta's colonial administration took another bold step: the official formation of the Helghan Militia, the first legally recognized planetary defense and civil service force outside of the traditional ISA, USA, or UCN military command structures. Publicly, the Helghan Militia was framed as necessary. With expanding trade routes, rising orbital traffic, and new settlements forming across the Protectorate, customs enforcement, civil policing, and ceremonial security could no longer rely solely on overstretched ISA detachments. A local force tailored to Helghan's unique needs and reporting directly to the Protectorate's government was deemed both efficient and symbolic of Helghan's growing self-sufficiency. However, the announcement sent ripples of unease through the halls of ISA Alpha Centauri. Though the militia was kept intentionally small and lightly armed, its duties limited to customs inspections, internal security, and official ceremonies, the ISA saw its creation as a challenge to its exclusive military mandate in the region. Critics within the Interplanetary Strategic Alliance warned that even a symbolic force, if allowed to grow unchecked, would evolve into something far more dangerous. As a result, a series of restrictions were imposed by the ISA. The Helghan's militia size was capped, heavy weaponry, military-grade vehicles, and autonomous combat platforms were prohibited. Most critically, all commanding officers in the Helghan militia were to be provided by the ISA. Helghan government complied. For now, yet among the working class Helghast, veterans of the early colonial trials and the workers fueling Vecta's economy, decided their own uniform, marching under the banner of peace, justice, and freedom, awoke something long dormant: pride. For the first time since the founding of the colony, Helghan saw a force that bore their name, wore their colors, and stood in their streets. The ISA might hold the rank, but Helghan had taken its first steps towards standing on its own. After decades of hardship, investment, and relentless labor, Helghan had finally completed its industrial metamorphosis. Across the scarred plains of the Helghan wastes, fusion turbines now stood like monolithic spires, endlessly feeding the power-hungry refineries that churn beneath the choking skies. Enormous processing complexes, fully automated and resilient to the hostile environment, converted Helghan's raw elements into usable energy and high-grade materials with ruthless efficiency. The infrastructure was no longer colonial, it was imperial in scale. With its planetary industrial grid completed, the Helghan Corporation declared full economic self-sufficiency. No longer reliant on imports for tools, fuel, or infrastructure components, Helghan could manufacture everything it needed, and export far more. From orbital fuel depots to heavy reactor cores, their goods flowed through the arteries of interstellar commerce. The energy trade alone had made Helghan indispensable. Passing colonial ships, frontier settlements, even the aging infrastructure of Earth itself all depended on Helghan's exported energy. With every tanker that left Hop 1, with every solar relay calibrated by Helghan engineers, their influence deepened, their wealth multiplied, and with wealth came power. Though the corporation still maintained token offices and representatives on Earth, its true center of operations had long since moved to Vecta. The towering corporate archaeologies in Vecta City housed Helghan's exclusive board, legal courts, and financial headquarters. Most of its operations, logistics, military contracting, resource pricing were now overseen from within the Protectorate, and by Helghans. By mid-year, the UCN officially acknowledged that over 92% of Helghan's corporate assets were no longer Earth-based. It was, on paper, still a UCN-regulated entity, but in reality, Helghan was becoming something more. A self-sustaining corporate superpower with the reach of a nation-state, the protection of a world, and the loyalty of millions across 2 planets. And behind it all, quietly steering the course of history, was not Earth or the ISA, but a company with no flag, no borders, only a future of its own design. As the populations of Vecta and Helghan swelled and the logistics of interplanetary governments grew, increasingly tangled, the Helghan Corporation made its most decisive political move yet: the transformation from a corporate entity into a civil administrative, framed as a pragmatic response to bureaucratic inefficiencies. The corporation petitioned the UCN and ISA Alpha Centauri for an extended charter, one that would authorize it to assume full local government responsibilities across both worlds. The request passed with little resistance, largely due to the corporation's proven track record in stabilizing Helghan's economy and Vecta's infrastructure, and due to growing disinterest or inability of Earth's governing bodies to maintain direct control. Under this new charter, the Helghan Corporation became the de facto government of the Protectorate. Its new powers were sweeping. The ISA withdrew from most civil functions. The corporation granted the right to levy taxes on all Protectorate citizens and commercial interests. Public services reorganized into sector divisions. A new civil identity registry replaced UCN's colonial IDs. For most citizens, the transition felt seamless, efficient even. Government buildings were rebranded, uniforms changed, and service delivery improved. Lines shortened, roads were repaired, utility grids modernized. On the surface, the system worked, but there were limits, reminders that the Protectorate, for all its independence, was not entirely free. The ISA imposed strict conditions on the expanded charter, primarily aimed at containing Helghan's ambitions. Ship construction quotas remained tightly regulated. Orbital industrial zones required ISA authorizations for expansion. Any colonial ventures beyond the current system borders were explicitly prohibited without USCN oversight and approval. Helghan accepted these restrictions, but within its newly built ministries of planning and aerospace, new maps were being drawn. New shipyards quietly budgeted, and new stars marked in red. The corporation now wore the robes of government, but it never forgotten it was still at core a machine designed to grow, to expand, and to adore. Decades of disciplined governance, booming trade, and tight fiscal control had borne fruit. For the 6th consecutive year, the Helghan administration posed a significant tax surplus, surpassing all colonial zones and even several UCN planetary blocks in economic output. While unlike many governments, the Helghan civil leadership, still rooted in corporate tradition, refused to overspend or redistribute the wealth carelessly. Instead, the surplus was stockpiled. By 2155, the Disaster Contingency Fund had ballooned into one of the largest concentrated reserves of capital in human history, rivaled only by the Interplanetary Banking Guild and Earth's own Central Reserve. The war chest of this magnitude and a self-sustaining industrial and food infrastructure already in place, the Helghan leadership made a move few thought possible. They offered to purchase the Alpha Centauri system outright. The proposal was staggering in its scope. Rather than continue sending yearly tithes, mandatory contributions in taxes, resources, and political support to Earth through the UCN and the ISA, the Helghan Protectorate proposed to transition to a fee-based services model. Under this system, they would remain a member of the UCN and receive ISA services as needed, but on a contractual basis, not as a subordinate entity. In effect, it was the privatization of an entire star system. Under normal conditions, such a proposal would have been summarily rejected by Earth's political council and the UCN Assembly. But in 2155, the UCN was struggling, overextended by rising tensions in the Outer Rim, the explosive costs of new colonial expeditions in the Perseus Corridor, and mounting unrest in the Jupiter Expanse. Budgets were bleeding red, and support for expansionism was fading fast back home. Helghan's offer was simply too good to refuse. After weeks of negotiation, the deal was ratified under emergency fiscal provisions. The Alpha Centauri system, including Vecta, Helghan, and all established orbital infrastructure, would remain within the UCN Charter, but now operated under a leasehold sovereignty model. In exchange, Helghan would provide a massive lump sum payment to the UCN, equal to several decades' worth of projected contributions, a service fee structure to fund the continued presence of the ISA Alpha Centauri, now officially acting as a contracted peacekeeping and oversight force, continued nominal recognition of UCN authority, primarily ceremonial. To the public, it was portrayed as an advanced step in decentralizing UCN authority, an evolution to interstellar governments. To Helghan, it was something far greater. They had purchased their system with coin, not blood, and now for the first time in human history, the corporate government owned a star. With the ink barely dry on Alpha Centauri purchase, the Helghan administration wasted no time asserting its autonomy. Now untethered from Earth's annual TIF, and free to set its own tax and investment policies, the dual world protectorate entered a golden age of runaway economic and industrial expansion. The automated refineries on Helghan were expanding exponentially, covering entire sectors of the Helghan waste and a lattice of reactors, conveyor fields, and atmospheric-controlled processing hubs. Robotic labor guided by centralized AIs and shielded against the world's corrosive elements worked seamlessly. The export of highly dense energy cells, fusion cores, and rare isotopes tripled within a decade. Meanwhile, above the planet, Hop-1, Helghan's orbital platform, grew into something far grander than its original design. With layer upon layer of fabrication rings, cargo docks, and interstellar mooring towers added over the years, the station evolved into the largest orbital structure outside of the Terran system, rivaled only by the civilian complexes in high Earth orbit. But it was not just scale that mattered, it was position. As a hub system connecting Earth to the majority of its interstellar colonies, Alpha Centauri, anchored by Helghan, became the choke point of humanity's trade routes. Every vessel, civilian or military, commercial or private, had to pass through the Helghan-controlled space to reach the outer colonies. And the Helghan administration understood the value of a gate. A transit service fee was imposed on all ships traversing the system. Officially, the charges were levied for traffic coordination, customs enforcement, orbital tracking, emergency SAR, search and rescue services, and environmental compliance. In reality, the fee acted as a thinly disguised tariff, a means of profiting off of each corridor, every engine, every credit that flowed through the stars. The world reacted, but Helghan had planned for that too. Shipping companies that registered with the Helghan administration were issued a residence permit, which provided substantial waivers, discounts, and preferential routing. Over the decades, this incentivized hundreds of mid-tier logistic firms to relocate their headquarters, dry docks, and capital ships to Helghan orbit, swelling the Protector's economic base even further. By 2190, the effects were undeniable. The Helghan administration controlled the majority of non-Earth interstellar trade. Vecta's population has surpassed 300 million, with urban centers reaching into every biozone. The Protector's GDP rivaled that of Earth's eastern central block. The orbital fleet registry listed over 1,200 privately owned starships operating under Helghan permit. To many, Helghan was now a superpower, all but in name. A corporate-born, star-spanning entity that had bought its freedom, leveraged geography, and monetized the very lanes of space. To its citizens, it was proof of Helghan ingenuity and strength. To its rivals, it was a fortress of profit veiled in bureaucracy. And to the UCN, it was a dangerous precedent, one they could no longer control. By the final years of the 22nd century, the United Colonial Nations could no longer ignore the shadow cast by Helghan's growing grip on interstellar commerce. Once merely a model colonial success, the Helghan Protectorate became a titan, controlling star lanes, regulating customs, and taxing trade at every crucial junction between Earth and the existing human frontier. Its transit service fees had become the norm for interstellar shipping, its orbital shipyards the busiest known in space. In its economy, a juggernaut fueled not by conquest, but by monopoly. But the UCN had underwritten the expansion. It had funded the early colonies. It policed the routes. It had paid in blood and credits to open the stars to mankind. And now, it watched the spoils flow not back to Earth, but into Helghan banks. Frustration turned to action. In 2198, under mounting pressure from the Terran economic blocs and old guard military factions, UCN passed a sweeping set of reforms known collectively as the Celestial Revenue and Security Directives. These laws imposed new tariffs and licensing fees on colonial trade, even for those passing through non-Terran controlled space. Heavy taxes on independent colonies, particularly those showing signs of economic alignment with Helghan. Mandatory registration for commercial vessels under expanded UCN jurisdiction, with non-compliance punishable by seizure. The stated goal was to restore fair contribution and regulatory oversight to the human commons. The reality was something closer to economic siege. The influx of revenue was staggering, and it was funneled directly into massive expansion of the United Colonial Army Navy. No longer simply a peacekeeping force, the UCA Navy underwent radical transformation. Its design priorities shifted from patrol and defense to power projection and planetary warfare. For the first time in history, the Navy began construction on heavy cruisers, large-scale troop transports, and system assault groups, designed not to protect colonies, but to subdue them. The message was clear. Though not officially spoken, the ISA fleets of the outer colonies, including Helghan's own system defenses, were now considered potential targets. The war had not begun, the infrastructure of war was being laid. The UCN publicly stated that these ships were built for security in uncertain times. Privately, Earth's leadership feared what Helghan might do next, and prepared, if necessary, to break its grip by force. Following the sweeping reforms of the Celestial Revenue and Security Directives, United Colonial Nations took a bolder step. It began to roll back key privileges granted to the Helghan administration under the Helghan/Vecta Purchase Agreement of 2155. Most notably, the right to maintain a large independent home fleet, previously justified as necessary for system defense and customs enforcement, was rescinded. The UCN claiming that the Helghan growing naval presence now posed a threat to interstellar balance. The tariff system on interstellar shipping, long criticized as an unauthorized Helghan tax on human trade, was declared a violation of UCN free transit principles and ordered dismantled. The Helghan administration responded with a firm refusal, citing both treaty obligations and the principle of system sovereignty. Helghan leadership denounced the move as unlawful overreach and a direct economic attack. However, to avoid open conflict, they agreed to enter high-level negotiations with the UCN and ISA officials to explore a possible compromise. Behind the scenes, however, pressure on the Helghan's government was mounting. not from Earth, but from within. On Vecta, the planetary elite, landowners, investors, and high-ranking administrators feared that the concession to Earth would undermine their anatomy and threaten the financial systems built on tariff revenue and unrestricted defense. In Helghan, powerful corporations running shipyards, fuel depots, and logistic fleets had grown fat on exclusive shipping contracts and discounted permits. The removal of these privileges would collapse the entire sector overnight. They issued a unified warning: no compromise on tariffs or self-defense. For the first time in over a generation, the previously harmonious corporate-government alliance and the Protectorate began to harden into something more defiant, more political. Editorials in Vecta's media spoke openly of betrayal by Earth. Executives from Helghan Industrial Guild held closed-door summits with militia officials. Helghan-based warships quietly resumed full patrol formations in defiance of ISA warnings. The negotiations continued. On paper, despite months of negotiation, diplomatic overtures, and mounting tension, efforts to resolve the growing conflict between the United Colonial Nations and the Helghan administration ultimately failed. Earth's stance hardened. What began as a concern over economic independence and tariff enforcement had escalated into something far more rigid, an assertion of unquestioned authority. The UCN delivered its final demand to Vecta City: immediate and full compliance with the new regulations. All special economic privileges were to be revoked. Helghan Home Fleet was to be disbanded. Tariffs on interstellar shipping were to cease. The message was clear: submit or face consequences. To the Helghan administration, this was nothing short of an ultimatum, and they answered in kind. On the 14th day of the 8th month, in a televised address transmitted across all the protector channels, the High Administrator stood behind the joint banners of the Helghan and Vecta flags and read this final decree. We did not cross the stars to remain bound by chains. We built our future with our hands, bled for it, died for it, and rose again. From this day forth, we are no longer a client of Earth. We are an independent colony. We are Helghan, sovereign and indivisible. With that, the Helghan administration formally seceded from the United Colonial Nations. This announcement sent tremors through the human sphere. The UCN immediately condemned the move as an illegal and treacherous act, initiating sanctions, freezing remaining Helghan assets and Terran-controlled accounts, and instructing all ISA and UCA forces to begin containment planning. On Vecta and Helghan, however, the declaration was met with a celebration and resolve. Crowds flooded Vecta plazas, waving the tri-armed banner of peace, justice, and freedom. The Helghan militia was formally recognized as the Helghan Defense Forces, and security stations across the system were mobilized for what many now saw as an inevitable confrontation. Earth had demanded obedience, Helghan had chosen independence, and the long cold shadow war began to stretch across the stars. In the immediate aftermath of Helghan's former secession, the United Colonial Nations found itself facing a sobering reality. While political condemnation and asset freezings made headlines, they did little to reverse the facts on the ground. Helghan remained in control of the Alpha Centauri strategic lanes, and the world economy was still deeply intertwined with Helghan's energy exports, logistic networks, and orbital infrastructure. Initial proposals for a total trade embargo were quickly dismissed. A full cutoff of Helghan goods and shipping will not just punish the royal colony, it will cripple Earth itself. The UCN's analysts confirmed that many have suspected for a long time. Earth's survival is now dependent on steady shipments from the colonial frontier, and most of those flowed through the Helghan control space. Without them, Earth's cities will go dark in months. Its orbital stations will be unable to maintain operations. Its military fleet, even at full strength, lacked the logistical autonomy to sustain prolonged isolation. A new strategy was needed, one that preserved access to the colonies while still punishing Helghan's defiance. The solution? Control the lanes. In a high-level classified session of the UCN Security Council, a decision was made to deploy a powerful UCA Navy strike fleet to siege the navigational checkpoints at the outer edges of the Helghan space. These points, located at Lagrange gates and gravitational slingshot zones, served as primary corridors through what nearly all interstellar traffic to and from the outer colonies flowed. By occupying these routes, the UCA would achieve three goals: protect Earth's vital trade routes, establish a hard perimeter capable of isolating Helghan's access to the rest of the colonies, and lay the groundwork for a full blockade of Helghan itself. The operation was codenamed Operation Stranglehold. Mobilization began immediately. 3 UCA Navy battlegroups, including newly commissioned heavy cruisers and orbital insertion platforms, were dispatched from Earth control space. Troop transports and fleet supply vessels were routed to the fortified staging areas on the edge of the UCN territory. ISA Alpha Centauri was placed on high alert with orders to remain neutral unless directly threatened. To the public, the UCN framed the operation as a protective measure to ensure continued peace and commerce. But behind closed doors, it was acknowledged for what it truly was: the opening move in a war of attrition. Helghan had declared independence. Earth would now test whether it could survive it. As Operation Stronghold commenced, then the UCA Navy began seizing critical navigation choke points in the Helghan system. Tensions within the Helghan Protectorate reached a breaking point. The ISA forces still stationed at Vecta and Helghan, remnants of an older security arrangements from the UCN era, were now seen as an eternal threat. A fifth column embedded deep within sovereign territory. Initially, the Helghan administration attempted to resolve the situation with restraint. Proposals were submitted for joint command realignment, offering ISA personnel local commissions within the Helghan Defense Forces. Economic incentives and legal guarantees were included. An attempt to co-opt ISA forces into the new order. Most refused. The administration responded decisively. An executive decree ordered the full expulsion of all ISA forces from Helghan control space. What was meant to be a swift and symbolic removal, however, turned violent almost immediately. On Vecta, Helghan security teams attempted to detain ISA Marine commanders but met with lethal resistance. Barracks, communication hubs, and naval logistic depots erupted in sudden gunfire. On Helghan, the situation deteriorated even faster, with ISA warships breaking orbit and firing warning shots at Helghan patrol ships, attempting to enforce blockade orders. Skirmishes ignited across both worlds. The Helghan Defense Forces, despite overwhelming local numbers, proved unprepared for the reality of full-scale combat. Hastily expanded from militia ranks, the HDF suffered from outdated equipment, insufficient training, and fractured command structure. The ISA Marines, in contrast, were elite professionals, hardened veterans of colonial conflicts with access to superior technology, tactics, and command experience. Though outnumbered, many ISA forces fought their way out, escaping into the hinterlands of Vecta or vanishing deep in space aboard fast frigates and blockade runners. By year's end, most surviving ISA forces had gone to ground, forming a decentralized resistance across the system. From hidden bases, concealed bunkers, and mobile flotillas, they launched hit-and-run raids, sabotaging Helghan infrastructure, striking supply convoys, and broadcasting anti-secession propaganda across Helghan space. The war had begun in earnest. The skies of Alpha Centauri, once the arteries of human commerce, were now divided into zones of conflict, marked by burning wreckage and silent orbital debris. The Protectorate was sovereign in name, but in truth its sovereignty would have to be won with blood. Under 2 years of tense build-up and violent skirmishes, a UCA Navy fleet, dispatched under Operation Stronghold, arrived at the Helghan system in full strength. Led by Admiral Solon Merrick, the fleet consisted of over 40 warships, including heavy cruisers, escort carriers, troop transports, and destroyer screens, the most powerful military presence ever deployed outside Seoul. Their first act was to rendezvous with the surviving ISA forces, ragged but determined remnants of the initial conflict on Vecta and Helghan. Once regrouped, the combined fleet executed Phase 1 of the campaign, the seizure of the Alpha Centauri navigational choke points. The slingshot corridors and Lagrange gates that linked the systems to the border human sphere. Within weeks, the UCA had locked down the major transit routes, establishing a secure corridor from Earth to the remaining colonies. When trade flow secured, Phase 2 began. The main force of the fleet turned toward Helghan, aiming to establish a flow blockade of the industrial world. The plan was simple: choke Helghan's orbital infrastructure, cut it off from fuel, trade, and interstellar contact, and force the Protectorate to capitulate without the need of a planetary invasion. But the Helghan administration had other plans. Though lacking in capital warships, Helghan's custom fleet, a vast network of refitted patrol cutters, armed cargo ships, and escort frigates, and even drone platforms, had been secretly expanded, hardened, and coordinated in preparation for this very day. These were not frontline vessels in name, but in function, they had become a navy. The UCA blockade formation moved into position around Helghan's orbit. The massed Helghan fleet, flying under civilian transponders, emerged from orbital blind spots and shadow zones. What began as a slow deployment turned into a full-scale naval engagement. Though outgunned and under-armored, the Helghan ships fought with ferocity and desperation. Swarms of drone fighters harassed UCA formations. Kamikaze shuttles rammed into sensor arrays. Modified haulers unleashed hidden torpedo racks before breaking apart in explosive escape trajectories. Helghan anti-orbital stations, built in secret along the upper exosphere, joined the fray with punishing railgun fire. The UCA, stunned by the suddenness and coordination of the attack, suffered early losses. But as the battle dragged on, the superior firepower and the discipline of the UCA Navy began to turn the tide. Precision orbital bombardments crippled Helghan's logistical ships. One by one, the civilian retrofits fell apart under sustained pressure. UCA's heavy cruisers, built for wars of domination, began to sweep aside the improvised resistance. Helghan's courage held, but its fleet cracked. By the battle's end, Helghan's orbit was ablaze, a graveyard of wreckage, drifting escape pods and sounds transponders. The UCA blockade was now in place, anchored by multiple carrier groups and orbital interdiction ports. The industrial heart of the Protectorate was under siege, but Helghan did not surrender. The attack had cost him dearly, but it had also revealed the truth to the system and the colonies beyond. Helghan would fight, no matter the cost. In the aftermath of the catastrophic naval defeat in orbit over Helghan, this time not in the silence of deep space, but in the destruction of the most iconic structure in the system. The Helghan orbital platform, once a symbol of interstellar commerce and technological ambition, was obliterated in a catastrophic explosion witnessed across the hemisphere. The station's lights winked out, its core ruptured, and within minutes, its superstructure disintegrated, showering debris into the upper atmosphere of Helghan and leaving nothing but a burning ring of wreckage in low orbit. What caused the disaster remains one of the most bitterly contested mysteries of the war. The United Colonial Nations was quick to release a statement claiming that the Helghan personnel had sabotaged the station, rigging it for self-destruction rather than allow its capture. According to the UCA's Navy's account, the crew evacuated in escape pods and descent craft, abandoning the station to burn rather than surrender to Terran control. The Helghan administration, however, issued a very different narrative. According to them, the station was deliberately targeted and destroyed by UCA cruisers during the orbital battle, an unprovoked act of aggression designed to break Helghan's spirit and remove the last symbol of its independence. Both sides presented incomplete sensor logs. Both accused the other of information. No definite evidence ever emerged. But for the people of Helghan and Vekta, perception became truth. The loss of the station wasn't just strategic, it was deeply personal. For decades, the station had represented Helghan's rise from the dust, the promise of sovereignty, and the connection between the two worlds of the Protectorate. Its destruction was seen nothing less than a declaration of extermination. Within hours, the High Administrator of the Protectorate, flanked by defense ministers and civic leaders, issued a transmission across all channels. Let the stars record this day. Helghan offered dialogue and it was met with orbital fire. Helghan offered peace and it was answered with betrayal. As of now, the Helghan Authority is at war with the United Colonial Nations. We did not start this war, but we will finish it. Across Alpha Centauri, the war entered a new phase, no longer political, but existential. No longer about tariffs or titles, but about survival. The skies above Helghan ablaze, its fleet shattered and its orbital station reduced to drifting wreckage. The UCA Navy found itself in possession of space superiority, but not victory. Despite this devastation, the planetary surface remained defiant. Helghan's terrain was harsh, its atmosphere punishing, and its people, hardened by decades of industrial survival, an orbital invasion, dropping troops onto irradiated tundras and subterranean manufacturing zones defended by entrenched local militias, was assessed by UCA commanders as costly, slow, and strategically unnecessary. Admiral Merrick, now in full control of the blockade fleet, made the call. Helghan would be watched, not conquered. A picket fleet, comprising of destroyers, sensor platforms, and interdiction ships, was left to enforce the blockade and prevent smuggling or reinforcement from escaping the planet. With the industrial core of the Helghan Protectorate effectively neutralized, the UCA command turned its attention to the true seat of power and culture, Vecta. Unlike Helghan, Vecta was vulnerable. Its lush, Earth-like biosphere made it ideal for orbital absorption and long-term occupation. Its cities are open, its infrastructure above ground, and its population, though proud, was less prepared for protracted resistance. More importantly, Vecta housed the Protectorate's central administration, its communication grids, and its civil leadership, and the economic brain of the Two-World Alliance. To crush Helghan's spirit, the UCA knew it had to take Vecta. By mid-year, the bulk of the UCA fleet, now reinforced by troop transports, logistic carriers, and orbital deployment craft, broke from Helghan orbit and accelerated toward Vecta under full battle formation. Recon probes preceded them. Communication jammers swept ahead in electronic silence. Behind the lead cruisers, dropships prepped for full atmospheric insertion. The war was no longer theoretical, no longer a question of politics. It was now a matter of occupation. Vecta, the jewel of the Helghan protectorate, stood in the crosshairs. The combined UCA and ISA fleet, fresh from its overwhelming victory over Helghan, entered Vecta's orbit in force. Facing them was little more than the battered remnants of the Helghan Customs Service, a few corvettes, retrofitted patrol ships, and orbital defense platforms, all hopelessly outmatched. The battle was swift. Helghan crews fought with courage but lacked both the firepower and colonization to resist. Within hours, Vecta's orbital grid had been dismantled, its stations silenced and its skies firmly under UCA control. On the surface, however, defiance was smoldering. The Helghan administration, broadcasting from the capital Arcology in Vecta City, declared it would resist to the last man. Emergency drills were conducted. The city's shield grid was activated. Orders went out for civil defense volunteers to prepare for the occupation. But resistance would not last long. In a calculated show of force, the UCA Navy unleashed a limited orbital strike, a demonstration barrage that targeted unoccupied zones of Vecta's wilderness with kinetic bombardment. Entire swaths of pristine forest were vaporized. The message was unmistakable. The full wrath of Earth could, and would, be unleashed, unless immediate surrender was given. Within 36 hours, the Helghan administration yielded. The UCA ground forces landed without resistance. Strategic infrastructure, spaceports, comm towers, transit hubs were seized. Civic buildings were surrounded. UCA Marines entered the government complex under full armor and arrested the senior leadership of the protectorate in a swift and televised operation. The Helghan High Administrator was placed under custody. Senior civil servants and command staff were detained and placed in orbital holding facilities. Executives of the Helghan Corporation, viewed as enablers of the rebellion, were rounded up. But not all were caught. In the chaos of surrender, many high-ranking officials and corporate leaders vanished, slipping into lower ecologies, industrial zones, and the rugged Vectan countryside. Some boarded hidden ships, others went to ground, forming a nucleus of what would soon become the underground resistance. The Helghan administration was officially shut down. The protectorate dissolved. The flag of peace, justice, and freedom was torn from buildings and replaced with the blue and gold of the UCN. Vecta had fallen. But occupation is never the same as control. In the shadows of shattered ministries and silent transmission towers, the embers of rebellion remained, and soon they would burn. When the courier ship arrived from Alpha Centauri, carrying encrypted reports of Vecta's surrender, Helghan's occupation, and the destruction of its fleet and orbital station, the UCN Senate convened an emergency session. The debate was brief and laced with bitterness. To many within the Senate, the rebellion had been a confirmation of a long-held suspicions that the Helghan Protectorate had grown too powerful, too arrogant, too distant from Earth's ideals. The war had proved that independence, even wrapped in economic rhetoric, was treason in waiting. The verdict was unanimous and final. The Helghan are too unruly to ever integrate into the United Colonial Order. Rather than attempt reconciliation, the UCN issued an executive directive dissolving all plans for reconstruction under joint governments. Instead, Vecta's future would be placed entirely in the hands of the ISA. The Interplanetary Strategic Alliance, once a regional policing and support force, granted full civil and military authority over Vecta. A new administration charter was drafted, one that placed the planet under direct ISA oversight, eliminating the possibility of another Helghan-style government forming in its shadow. Stripped of legitimacy, the broken remnants of the Helghan administration, held under house arrest or in exile, could do little more than rubber stamp the UCN's terms. New colony ships carrying loyal UCN citizens began departing from Sol for Vecta. Scientists, engineers, administrators, and families selected for political reliability and civic obedience. These new colonists were granted priority housing and government contracts. and their presence signaled the beginning of a new demographic wave, what meant to dilute and replace the memory of Helghan defiance. Across the human sphere, the message received loud and clear: harsh consequences of rebellion, mass arrests, orbital bombardment, loss of sovereignty, and occupation were not lost on other colonies, many of which had quietly sympathized with Helghan's earlier calls at anatomy. These sympathies vanished overnight. The UCN's right to regulate, tax, and control space shipping, once fiercely debated across frontier systems, was now unchallenged. The Helghan War had ended, but it had ended on Earth's terms. From the ashes of the Protectorate, a new era of enforced order began to take shape. The Protectorate dismantled, its leaders imprisoned or scattered, and the ISA authority installed as a new governing body. The UCN believed Vecta had been pacified, but beneath the polished uniforms and official decrees, resentment smoldered. While most Helghan-descended citizens of Vecta had no appetite for further conflict, many simply seeking stability, jobs, and peace after years of disruption, a smaller, radical faction refused to accept the occupation. To them, the fall of Helghan administration was not justice, but a betrayal, and they vowed that Vecta would never belong to Earth loyalists. These extremists, many with military training and deep ties to the former regime and corporate infrastructure, slipped into the cracks of arcologies and wildlands. There they began to form what the ISA would eventually call the Helghan Underground. They had no standing army, no flag, no fleet, but they had knowledge of Vecta's cities, access to hidden weapon caches, and support, quiet, reclusant, but vital, of a sympathetic population. By late 2202, the first attacks began. Improvised explosives detonated at ISA military depots and administration centers. Ambushes on transit lines, sniper attacks and bombings targeting UCN loyalists and ISA patrols. Assassination of collaborators, including Helghan seen cooperating too closely with the ISA. The ISA's response was swift and heavy-handed. Raids, curfews, blockades, and arrests became part of daily life in the outer districts. But every crackdown only seemed to spread the resistance further, driving it deeper into Vecta's sprawling infrastructure. Refugee slums, industrial tunnels, and forgotten arcology sectors became breeding grounds for insurgency. By 2204, it was clear Vecta was no longer an idyllic colony. The paradise had been shattered. Now it was a world divided. As the Helghan Underground's insurgency intensified and the terror campaigns escalated, the ISA Governor-General Vecta found himself waging a war he could neither win nor contain. Attacks against ISA installations and UCN loyalists became more frequent and deadly. The cost of maintaining order surged. International scrutiny grew louder. In response, the Governor-General implemented a sweeping set of security directives that effectively transformed whole sectors of Vectan cities into militarized zones. Curfews were extended, mass surveillance systems were deployed. Travel for Helghans between cities was restricted. Entire neighborhoods were subject to search and confiscate operations. Educational and employment opportunities for Helghan civilians was increasingly limited in the name of security. To many Helghans, especially those uninvolved in the violence, the line between peacekeeping and occupation had vanished entirely. By 2207, desperation and frustration gave way to a bold idea. Several of Vecta's most prominent Helghan families, many of whom had held wealth and influence beyond the collapse of the Protectorate, quietly pooled their resources. With access to deep financial networks, hidden off-world accounts, and sympathetic smugglers, they bought back and refurbished a fleet of old colonizer ships, once used to ferry the first settlers from Earth to Alpha Centauri. Then the community sent a delegation, led by a respected academic and former civic leader, to formally petition the ISA, grant the Helghan people the right to leave. They did not ask for independence. They did not challenge the UCN's rule. They simply asked for a place of their own, on Helghan. To the ISA, the proposal was politically expedient. The Helghan homeworld, still under blockade and with limited infrastructure, was seen as a containment zone. Harsh, remote, and cut off from the interstellar arteries. The fewer Helghans of Vecta, the easier it would be to pacify the colony and resume ISA-led development. The Governor-General approved the request under the pretense of voluntary resettlement. So beginning in 2208, the Helghan exodus began. Over the next 2 years, millions of disaffected Helghan civilians boarded aging colony ships and makeshift transports. leaving behind their homes, their birthrights, and their past in search of something long denied to them. Sovereignty, even in hardship. They've arrived on Helghan to find a world still scarred from war, still recovering from the blockade and orbital devastation. They also found community, defiance, and purpose. The small, scattered enclaves of survivors that had escaped Vecta's fall now grew into a full-scale colonial society. By 2210, the population of Helghan had exploded. New settlements were carved into rock, military academies and civil councils were founded. The seeds of a new nation, forged in exile and resentment, had been planted. And across the stars, the other colonies watched, some with sympathy, some with dread. Because Helghan had not been broken, it had simply gone home. As the Helghan exodus neared its end, and millions of displaced colonists settled into the harsh volcanic terrain of their ancestral world, a grim truth became clear. Neither the ISA nor the UCN intended to help them rebuild. Despite authorizing the migration, Earth refused to fund any infrastructure, aid packages, or settlement assistance. The ISA, still reeling from the cost of the war and continued occupation of Vecta, refused to send resources or relief personnel. Any attempts by the Helghan to request reparations were met with bureaucratic silence or redirection to the UCN trade policy. To the colonial powers, the Helghan had made their choice, and now they would be left to survive or perish on their own terms. But the optics of this abandonment posed a problem. To avoid appearing cruel or admitting to the act of mass exile, the UCN issued a formal decree before the Assembly in early 2211. Let it be known that the Helghan people are recognized as a sovereign entity, with full rights of self-government over the planetary territory of Helghan, in perpetuity with all associated responsibilities. This symbolic gesture served a dual purpose: to absolve the UCN and ISA of all obligations to assist the new colony. It created a legal precedent to continue the blockade and trade restrictions. Though the UCN publicly hailed the decision as a humanitarian success and the final step in the normalization of Alpha Centauri, the reality is far colder. Helghan was alone. Diplomatic relations remained frozen. The world now was recognized, yes, but quarantined. But to the Helghans, the declaration held another meaning entirely. They had been given their own planet, not by charity, not by diplomacy, but by blood, defiance, and endurance. And with the chains of Earth finally broken, the surviving leaders of the former protectorate began to rebuild their nation, this time not as a colony, nor a client, but as something entirely Helghan. The age of appeasement was over. What would follow was a new age of resolve. Between the years 2215 and 2220, the newly resettled planet endured what would be later known to Helghan history as the Crucible. It brewed a period of hardship, loss, and slow adaptation that would shape the psyche of an entire generation. The refugees who had lived on Vecta's fertile valleys now found themselves scattered across ash-choked plains, acidic rainstorms, and irradiated hills. The weather systems were hostile and erratic. Lashing winds and violent electrical storms tore through the hastily assembled shelters. Supply shortages were constant, medical care almost non-existent, and the soil corruption made agriculture nearly impossible at first. Casualties soared. Illness and starvation claimed tens of thousands in the first years. Collapse of temporary housing during the Helghan's infamous Black Squalls left entire camps buried under rock and ice. Mental health deterioration and social unrest became rampant, and survivors from every caste and background clashed in overcrowded camps. But the Helghan people endured. By 2218, the death toll, once unspeakably high, began to subside. What had started as chaos was replaced by a growing sense of grim purpose. Surviving engineers repurposed the last of the old colonizer ships into fusion hubs, shelters, and factories. Medics trained others. Small groups of agronomists working through toxic conditions identified hardy plant strains that could grow in processed soils. And slowly a civilization began to emerge. Modular habitation zones expanded from camps. Localized industry was rekindled. Food production resumed through vertical farms, fungus cultivation, and carefully rationed aquaponics systems. People who had once governed the glittering cities of Vecta now toiled beneath the sulfur skies. But they did not forget who they were, nor did they forget who left them to die. By 2220, the Helghan population, once scattered and broken, was unified by trauma, bonded by survival, and hardened as the people no longer dependent, no longer naive. What rose from the ash and bone was not a democracy, nor a free market colony. It was a state forged in necessity, forged in pain. And while its buildings were few and its children were still hungry, Helghan had taken its first step towards becoming a nation again. After years of suffering, survival, and scattered struggle, Helghan's fractured society reached a turning point. The refugee camps, once isolated pockets of desperation scattered across the toxic plains and volcanic ridges, had slowly evolved into functioning communities, each with its own leadership, workforces, and survival strategies. But despite the localized resilience, the dangers of division loomed large. Disputes over geothermal access, hoarding of medical supplies, and the threat of internal conflict threatened to unravel what progress had been made. Recognizing this, a call was issued from Cap Helghan, one of the earliest and most stable settlements, to convene a planet-wide council of leadership. A summit unlike anything seen since the fall of Vecta. For the first time since the collapse of the Protectorate, the heads of the various camps and districts gathered in a fortified structure built into the side of the geothermal canyon. There were no golden halls, no press cameras, only withered leaders, most of them former civic officials, engineers, and survivors turned organizers. Over the course of 10 days, they debated, negotiated, and finally agreed. Helghan must be reborn, not as a scattered remnant, but as a unified civilization. From that summit came a binding pact, signed by representatives from over 90% of the known refugee camps across the surface of Helghan. The document, etched into steel rather than paper, was a charter of collective purpose. All participating camps would pool their labor, food, and energy resources. Trade and production would be centrally coordinated through a unified labor registry and supply network. A provisional governing body, drawn from every major settlement, would be established to reform the Helghan administration. The administration's sole mandate: rebuild Helghan, not as a colony, but as a sovereign, self-sustaining nation. No longer splintered and directionless, Helghan was now guided by a single administration, voice, and, fueled by cooperation, necessity, and ideological resolve, the collectivization of resources wasn't just a practical move. It became a cultural cornerstone. A rejection of the corporate aristocracy that had once ruled in response to the betrayal that had suffered at Earth's hands. From the act of unification emerged not merely an administration, but the embryo of a new order, one built on shared struggle, equal labor, and the absolute loyalty of the survival of Helghan. And in the ash-stained banners rising from the camp towers, a new slogan began to spread among the people. Unity is strength, sacrifice is freedom. Helghan endures. Even as new Helghan administration took shape and the planet's shattered society began its slow climb towards stability, troubling signs emerged, not from enemies, but from Helghan itself. The other settlers had long known the planet was hostile. Its acidic rains, erratic electromagnetic storms, and exotic radiation fields made surface work dangerous and unpredictable. But by 2221, doctors and biomonitors across the growing settlements began compiling evidence of systematic health crisis. The condition came to be known, common vernacular, as lung burn, caused by sustained exposure to airborne particulates, ionized ash, and toxic winds. Lung burn was a degenerative respiratory illness that scarred the lungs, impaired cognition, and led to eventual organ failure. It did not strike immediately, but among outdoor laborers, especially miners, engineers, and salvagers, it was devastating. By the age of 30, it had become the leading cause of death across the colony. Efforts to request medical assistance from the ISA were ignored. No shipments arrived, no off-world doctors volunteered. Helghan, recognized as sovereign and only name, remained under blockade and left to rot. With no outside help, the administration issued its own emergency decree. All outdoor workers will now be required to wear respiratory filtration masks at all times. The masks, once seen as a temporary solution, quickly became a defining feature of Helghan life. They were crude at first, recycled polymer lenses, hand-fitted filters, but soon evolved into standardized equipment distributed by local labor councils. A new cultural division emerged. Those who wore the mask were the working class, and those who did not were bureaucrats, intellectuals, or elite figures. The mask became more than a tool, it became a symbol of sacrifice and identity. To wear one was part of the Helghan struggle. To breathe unfiltered air was to stand apart from the nation's pain. And yet, amid the hardship, hope returned from beneath the soil. That same year, teams of prospectors, driven by desperation and guided by repurposed pre-war scanners, uncover vast veins of rare mineral resources beneath Helghan's crust. Everything from industrial-grade metals to exotic isotopes vital for energy production were found deep in geological seams. Within months, mining became the dominant industry across the fledgling settlements. Though the work was brutal and often fatal, it offered something that had been scarce since the fall of Vecta: economic leverage. Helghan was still dying, but now it was also digging. But what it unearthed would one day power cities, fuel warships, and would redraw the maps of influence across the stars. As the fire of Helghan's crucible years began to dim, and the Helghan administration stabilized its grip over a recovering colony, signs of recovery were beginning to show. Permanent settlements replaced refugee camps. Supply chains, still primitive but functional, linked farms, mines, and smelters. The worst of the collapse was behind them. Helghan was still battered, but it was no longer dying. It was during this fragile window of regrowth that the Independent Colony Strategic Alliance made contact. The ICSA, formed in the wake of the Helghan conflict, had emerged as a neutral alternative to the ISA, an interstellar alliance aimed at supporting independent colonies without enforcing UCN governments or ideology. It was by design a response to the heavy-handedness of Earth's institutions, intended to give self-governed worlds access to trade routes, defense advisory, and infrastructure aid without the chains of occupation. To Helghan, it might have seemed like the ideal ally, but it arrived too late, and with the wrong flag. The offer was generous: assistance in rebuilding orbital sensors and defensive tracking grids, access to food and medical shipments through neutral corridors, observer status within the ICSA's decentralized council. No tribute, no taxes, no military interference. But the Helghan administration, shaped now by years of betrayal, famine, and blockade, responded with firm and immediate refusal. In the broadcast on the reconstructed civil chambers of the new Rygar, the Helghan spokesman declared, "We have known the price of trust. It cost us a world. Helghan will rise by the strength of its own hand, or it will not rise at all." To the ICSA, the rejection was a disappointment, but not unexpected. To the Helghan people, it was further proof of the government's new doctrine: self-reliance at any cost. The interaction was brief, but it was legacy profound. From this moment on, Helghan would not participate in any interstellar alliances. All aid and diplomatic channels were closed. Suspicion of outside influence became codified in policy and education. The idea of a closed system, a world that neither asked nor answered to others, became a pillar of Helghan identity. Though the Helghan administration had stabilized its broken world and rebuilt basic infrastructure, truce prosperity remained elusive. From 2223 onward, the colony entered a long and bitter phase known in Helghan records as the Long Siege, a period not marked by open warfare, but by slow suffocation. The ISA, still operating with near total control over Vecta and its surrounding systems, imposed a series of long-term trade sanctions on Helghan. Disguised as security measures, these restrictions crippled Helghan's ability to export goods directly, forced the middlemen brokers into every transaction, and drove prices of imported essentials, food, medicine, synthetic building materials, far beyond reason. Even with the emergence of valuable mineral trade, Helghan was forced to trade on unfavorable terms, surrendering rare ores and isotopes in exchange for dwindling resources. Entire districts were left with rationed medical access, vitamin deficiencies became common, fuel for heating was strictly regulated. Life on Helghan was short, brutal, and joyless. Working class morality rates remained high, driven by lung burn injuries and chronic malnutrition. Nutrition was minimal. An entire generation is raised on chemical rations, lichen farms, and synthetic fungi. Labor expectations were extreme. 12 to 16-hour shifts were standard in factories and mining outposts. But through this fire, the Helghan people endured. More than endured, they adapted, clinging to a Spartan ethos of self-sacrifice, discipline, and obedience. Comfort was not expected. Survival was only a luxury. Every gain was shared communally. The weak were cared for by the collective. Children were raised with clear message: Helghan is pain, but pain is purpose. Over the decades, this culture hardened its identity. Yet as living conditions slowly improved, as new foundries came online, as automated farms began to yield results, something else began to grow: resentment. Resentment towards the ISA, whose sanctions continued to strangle trade. Resentment towards Vecta, whose people lived in comfort under Terran rule. And perhaps, more dangerously, resentment towards the Helghan Authority itself. Though nominal power, the Authority had meekly accepted the ISA's restrictions. Citing the need for diplomacy, stability, and survival, they avoided confrontation. They negotiated, pleaded, and waited for fairer treatment. To the people, this began to look less like strategy and more like cowardice. The working class, especially the mask-wearing miners, soldiers, and technicians who bore the brunt of Helghan's suffering, began to murmur. By the early 24th century, the Interplanetary Strategic Alliance found itself reassessing its long-term strategy for controlling its colonial holdings. The ongoing occupation of Vecta, once seen as a demonstration of UCN authority and stability, had evolved into a costly burden, one increasingly unpopular back on Earth, and particularly among the wealthier core systems funding the effort. As a result, several richer ISA-aligned factions began to transition away from maintaining expensive, far-reaching interstellar fleets, instead investing heavily in orbital defense networks, automated platforms, railgun arrays, kinetic interceptor satellites, and laser tracking systems. These immobile but powerful installations were seen as more economically sustainable, less vulnerable to ambush, and ideal for defending vital colonies like Vecta. Following this strategic trend, the Vectan ISA High Command made a decision that will echo across the Helghan system. The former blockade of Helghan was stood down. After nearly a century of containment, the massive picket fleets that had orbited Helghan, scanning every frigate and enforcing trade compliance, were withdrawn. In their place, a smaller customs fleet was stationed near the system's gravitational corridors, sufficient to monitor traffic, but incapable of enforcing total isolation. At the same time, Vecta itself was encircled by one of the most advanced orbital defense networks in human sphere, including multi-tiered drone swarms, targeting satellites and kinetic missile interceptor stations. To the ISA, this shift marked a move towards efficiency and deterrence. Helghan was no longer worth the resources needed to choke it completely. If it attempted aggression, they could simply have repelled it from orbit. But on Helghan, the move was seen differently. After generations of brutal sanctions, surveillance, and isolation, the withdrawal of the blockade, however quiet and bureaucratic, felt like a moment of liberation. The old wound remained, but the chain has slackened. Trade, though still restricted, could now be navigated. Communications could be masked. Movements could begin. And more importantly, the ISA's decision signaled weakness. To many within the new hardened Helghan culture, shaped by pain, unity, and growing ideological extremism, it proved what the worker caste had suspected for decades. The enemy had grown complacent. Their will had eroded. Their vigilance was fading. From the bunkers of the mining guilds to the think tanks of the underground political cells, a singular idea began to spread once more. The time has come. Quiet but profound transformation began to take shape in 2305. As the third generation of Helghans born on the planet began to enter the world. Unlike their forebears exiled from Vecta, refugees from orbital ruins and survivors from systematic neglect, these children were true natives of Helghan, forged not by memory or nostalgia, but by the planet itself. The Helghan administration, having regained control over scientific infrastructure in the preceding decades, had quietly authorized a program of selective genetic conditioning, publicly marketed as health optimization and national vitality insurance. The program subtly altered fetal development using tailored retrovirus therapies, epigenetic triggers, and environmental stimulants. The results were unmistakable. Denser musculature and reinforced bone structures, enhanced pulmonary systems, producing lungs that filter toxins more efficiently, cellular resistance to Helghan's exotic radiation spectrum, shortened rest cycles, and higher tolerance for pain and fatigue. What emerged from the generational crucible was a new Helghan, not just in physiology, but in identity. They wore the mask not out of necessity, but as a rite of passage. They spoke little of Earth. To many it was foreign, irrelevant myth. They saw Vecta not as a lost home, but as a stolen paradise, occupied, decadent, and soft, educated in collectivist schools, trained from youth in discipline and self-sacrifice. This generation grew up with no memory of dependence. They were not exiles, they were not survivors, they were Hellcast. In public speeches, the administration began to adopt the term officially. Hellcast was no longer a slur or a makeshift label. It was now a title of pride, one worn by the people, shaped by adversity, born to a hostile world and bred for endurance, unity, and strength. And as this generation began to fill the factories, the barracks, and the political forums of Helghan, the administration saw in them something they had not felt in over a century. A future that no longer begged for survival. A future that could seize destiny. The economic tether between Helghan and Vecta, still strained by ISA-sanctioned control over trade routes and tariffs, had turned from lifeline to leash. While Vecta flourished, its corporate districts gleaming with orbital towers and its economy bloated on Helghan exports, the source of that wealth withered. The Helghan people, growing in number and burdened by a harsh world, now consumed more of their own dwindling resources just to survive. Food, medicine, shelter, air filtration, the planetary economy became overloaded, not by war or mismanagement, but by sheer population pressure and a lack of reinvestment. The tipping point came not from rebellion or invasion, but from rusted steel and broken gears, as more and more credits were diverted to civilian sustenance. Helghan's vital industries, its refineries, atmospheric processors, and mining rigs began to show signs of systematic neglect. Maintenance cycles were skipped, replacement parts delayed, safety inspections were postponed, and on a world as lethal and unforgiving as Helghan. This was an invitation to catastrophe. Each incident cost lives. 2333, cooling system failure at the Charon Deep Shaft causes collapse that buries 200 people. 2337, refinery in New Regar rages for 4 days due to faulty suppression gear, poisoning the entire district. Each incident costs lives, but worse, it cost time and money. The entire industrial output of Helghan slowed, and repair costs ballooned beyond projections. What followed was a severe economic downturn that would last nearly 2 decades. A cold era in Helghan history referred in the public discourse as the Bleeding Years. Vecta, holding near total control of Helghan's trade lanes, made no concessions. Export prices remained inflated, while import taxes surged. Machinery sent from Vecta was often outdated or overpriced. Requests for infrastructure loans were ignored or buried in bureaucratic red tape. To many Helghan citizens, it became clear Vecta's wealth was being built on Helghan's decay. And once more, resentment became fuel. Even as factories stalled and assembly lines slowed, Helghan society did not collapse. It adapted. Austerity became more intense. Resource recycling was elevated to an art form. Workers learned to operate malfunctioning systems by instinct alone. But the anger grew sharper, more organized, more ideological. In the bunkers beneath New Regar, in the rally chambers of massed workers and across the encrypted frequencies of militant broadcasts, the same message repeated. They strip our planet to build their palaces. They take our sweat and sell it back as gold. This is not trade. This is occupation in all but name. And so as the economic chains tightened, the will to break them grew even stronger. By the start of 2351, the economic collapse that had gripped Helghan for 2 decades reached its cruelest nadir. When industrial production crippled, supply lines fractured, and infrastructure in disrepair, even basic sustenance could no longer be guaranteed. Food rationing, already a norm in the outer districts, tightened drastically. Nutrient-rich farms failed under power shortages. Cargo shipments delayed by weeks meant perishable synthetic stock was often spoiled before reaching the cities. So for the first time since the dark days of 2220, Helghans began to die of starvation. In the streets of New Rygar, in the shadow of the central ministries, within walking distance of the administration halls, the public outrage was immediate and volcanic. But it wasn't just the administration that drew the people's hate. In broadcast after broadcast, Helghan economics and state analysts laid blame squarely at Vecta's feet. They argue, convincingly, that it was Vecta's monopoly on Helghan trade, its usurious export policies and relentless extraction of wealth without return that has starved Helghan's industry and driven the crisis. Particular name rose to infamy in this period: the Vectan exploiters. This phase became propaganda shorthand for the entire Vecta establishment. Corporations, trade officials, even civilians, cast as parasites fattening themselves on Helghan's suffering. Vivid posters began appearing in ration lines and assembly halls, showing Vectan officials in pristine uniforms gorging on food while Helghan children begged behind wire fences. But while Helghan descended deeper into depression, Vecta was not untouched. The collapse of the Helghan black market trade, once a vital shadow economy for Vecta profiteers, sent ripples through the upper echelons of its society. Energy shortages, raw material scarcities, and logistical bottlenecks caused by years of dependency on the under-table Helghan exports began to bite. Yet when asked, even begged, for aid, Vecta offered nothing. ISA authorities cited domestic unrest, supply issues, and security constraints. They sent no relief ships, No medical convoys, no resource interjections. To the starving masses of Helghan, this was not indifference. It was confirmation. Vecta would rather watch Helghans die than admit complacency. They were not partners. They were not neighbors. They were the enemy. In the darkest depth of Helghan's despair, its economy paralyzed, its people starving, and its future obscured by smog and hopelessness, a single voice rose above the silence. The voice belonged to Scholar Visari, a man whose origins were humble but whose rhetoric, charisma, and ideological clarity defined a new age. At first, Visari was just another public speaker, appearing at ration rallies and industrial funerals with a fire in his voice that no one else dared to wield. But while others called for survival, Visari spoke of destiny. We are not broken. We are not weak. We are the next step. The crucible has shaped us. The storms have forged us. The mask does not hide us. It reveals what we are. Visari rejected the shame Helghans were taught to feel about poverty, about the radiation-borne ailments, about the masks and their deformities. He told them that these were not defects, but proof of evolution, and the people listened. To the workers, he promised pride, honor, and purpose. To the elites, he offered a new order to protect Helghan from economic chaos. To the military, he preached duty, strength, and the resurrection of lost dignity. And to the youth, he gave identity. You were not cast-offs, you were Helghast. His message was dangerous. His rhetoric burned through the carefully constructed walls of the Helghan authorities' caution and compromise. Yet few in power dared to confront him. Why? Because he gave people hope, and hope was in short supply. Visari's genius was not just ideological, it was symbolic. He reclaimed the mask. For generations, the Helghan mask had been a mask of labor, of hardship, a necessity to survive in the poison world. To Visari, it was more. The air of this world may kill the outsider, he thundered at one rally, but we will breed it like warriors. The mask is not shame, it is proof. We are strong. Where they are weak, we endure. We adapt. We overcome. Suddenly the mask was not a tool, it was a uniform. Crown. A banner. In 2347, the mask had become sacred. The ideology that would come to define the Helghast identity had taken root. Militaristic unity, absolute leadership, racial superiority born from engineered suffering, devotion to the rebirth of Helghan through strength. Visari did not seize power, he was given it. By the people desperate for meaning, strength, and vengeance. And in return he gave them a promise. We will never beg again. We will never serve again. We will rise, not as supplicants, but as a legion. In a speech that would echo for centuries throughout the halls of Helghan's factories, schools, and war chambers, Scholar Visari gave his people more than unity. He gave them a name. Standing before a crowd of thousands in the heart of New Rygar, dressed in black of the movement he had birthed, Visari raised his gloved hand and spoke not of rebellion, not of economy, not of the past, but of identity. We are no longer what we once were. The Earthborn call us exiles, outcasts, mutants. But they cannot name what they do not understand. He paused, letting the silence fill the air like calm before a storm. We are Helghast. He declared the term to be rooted in Old English, from the word ghast, meaning spirit or ghost. It was no accident. Visari crafted the term with intent. It evoked fear as spirits do. It evoked reverence as ancestors do. And it evoked rebirth as only those who have died and returned can claim. The Earthborn cling to the decayed humanity. We have moved beyond it. We have been reforged by gravity, by radiation, by famine and blood. Our suffering has not weakened us. It has purified us. We are not ghosts of men. We are living proof of the future. In that moment, the term Helghast passed from word to doctrine. Within weeks, state propaganda adopted the term wholesale. Children in schools recited morning oaths not to the Helghan authority, but to the Helghast ideal. By 2340, Scholar Visari, hold on the hearts and minds of the Helghast people, had become unshakable. He did not yet rule. The remnants of the Helghan authority, cautious and fractured, still occupy positions of authority. While many within the administration sympathized with Visari's movement, they hesitated at granting full power to a man so radical, so theoretical, so Theoretical. Visari's answer was as calculated as it was ruthless. During a widely broadcast public address at the Unity Forum in Centro New Rygar, a gunman opened fire. The shots missed, barely. Visari, dramatically shielding a child from spray debris, was injured as he whisked away by his loyal guard. That night the city erupted in mourning and rage. The footage played on every screen in every district. Within hours, mass demonstrations filled the squares. Banners of the old regime were torn down. Protesters clashed with loyalist officials. Workers walked out of factories, chanting, "One voice, one people, one Visari." Behind closed doors, military commanders, many of them Visari sympathizers, declared martial law, claiming the civil government had lost control. With their backing, Visari emerged the following day, bandaged but defiant, standing atop the burned remains of Hall of Doctrine. "They tried to silence me," he thundered, "but I am your voice, and your voice cannot be killed. The time for compromise is over. I do not ask for your votes. I ask for your faith. Give me 10 years, and I will remake this world. I will turn ash into empire. I will make the Helghast not feared for their masks, but for their power." The crowd roared. The Helghan military pledged its allegiance, publicly, fervently. The remaining officials of the administration, now seen as cowardly bureaucrats, either fled, pledged loyalty, or were purged in the weeks that followed. And so Visari assumed the title of Autarch of the Helghast Empire. No elections, no legal transition, just the will of the broken people looking for strength, and the mask of a man who promised to deliver it. His first decree was simple, spoken into the cold wind before his newly raised black standard. "From this day forward, Helghan is not a colony, nor a debitor, nor a client. We are a nation, we are Helghast. We bow to no one." With power firmly in his grip, Autarch Visari wasted no time turning promise into policy. In the months following his ascension, Helghan entered an era of rapid militarization and radical cultural transformation. Revolution not just in industry and arms, but in mind, language, and symbolism. Visari's first priority was the enlargement and modernization of the Helghast military. What had once been a scattered defense force was reforged into a professional, ideologically driven war machine. He poured what little Helghan wealth existed into mass recruitment campaigns, destruction of weapon factories, and elite training academies. To him, every Helghast was a weapon, and they only needed to be sharpened. But Visari understood that war was not won on battlefields alone, it was won in the mind. In a sweeping act of culture engineering, he banned the use of written English across all state functions, schools, and broadcast. It was, he claimed, the language of servitude, the tongue of earth and its colonial yoke. In its place, Visari introduced a new writing system, the Helghast alphabet. Though an entirely new spoken language had been envisioned, the logistics proved insurmountable. Still, the symbolic separation from Terran heritage was achieved. Language became a political act. To speak or write in English became a mask of disloyalty. The Helghast alphabet became a code of belonging, another line drawn in ideological sand. Finally, Visari discarded the old banner of the Helghan administration, a relic he declared of compromise and weakness. In its place, he unveiled the Helghast triad, 3 bold arrows in stark red and black, each representing a foundational pillar of a new Helghast society. Duty to one's people, planet, and purpose. Obedience to the Autarch, the military, and the cause. Loyalty, unyielding, unflinching, unquestioned. The symbol now flew from every rooftop and military column, burned into the banners of every unit and broadcast on every propaganda reel. To many Helghast citizens, it became not just an emblem, but a creed. We are born in ash, bond by iron, and raised beneath the triad. While the Helghast military swelled under Visari's command, and the society around it hardened in ideological unity, another front quietly opened, not with bullets but with cargo manifests, bribes, and coded transmissions. Visari's next target was not the battlefield, it was the blockade. Though the ISA maintained an official embargo on Helghan trade, its enforcement had grown sluggish. The orbital customs fleet had been reduced to token patrols, stretched thin across the star system that no longer feared an open Helghan uprising. The Vecta public, largely pacified, began to question the cost of the blockade that had returned so little strategic value. Into this vacuum, the smugglers came. It began as low-level energy smuggling, crude cell shipments from abandoned refineries funneled to Vecta black markets, soon escalated into a shadowy economy. Helghan merchants disguised freighter signatures and bribed patrol captains to slip through customs scans. Vectan industrialists, desperate for cheap fuel and eager to pad their profits, turned a blind eye to the origin of the power cells. Off-world traders, seeing the efficiency and affordability of Helghan energy, began to route their business, quietly, unofficially, through neutral smugglers. Visari didn't merely tolerate this growth, he orchestrated it. His intelligence services created fake intermediaries, proxy traders, and neural backers, and neural corporations to launder Helghan energy through legal channels. Even as Vectan authorities spoke of blockade enforcement, the military knew that half of the city's infrastructure was now indirectly powered by Helghan exports. The ISA, humiliated and under-resourced, could do little. Random raids yielded only token seizures. Public doubt over the blockade's morality and necessity began to spread across Vecta. Debate sparked within the Vectan Senate about whether the embargo had become a liability. Visari, ever theatrical, remained silent on the matter publicly, but within the halls of command in Pyrrhus, he issued a directive known as Operation Tide Reversal. If they take our energy in secret, then they will take our ideology in silence. Let them drink from the well of the Helghast. In time, they will beg for the cup. The embargo was not broken with warships. It was bled dry with opportunity. After decades of economic deprivation, political isolation, and harsh survivalism, the Helghast took a decisive step toward reclaiming the place among the stars. Not through conquest, but through commerce. At the edge of the Helghan stratosphere, a new transfer station emerged from the haze, smaller than the once grand orbital platform lost in the UCN conflict. The new Helghan Exchange Club was nonetheless built with ruthless efficiency and modernized ingenuity. Construction by a fusion of military engineering units and collectivized industrial syndicates, it served a dual purpose: trade processing and symbolic resurrection. A statement that Helghan, once cut off and scorned, had returned, with smuggling operations laying the groundwork and the black market thirsting for cheap raw Helghan energy. The new transfer station formalized the illegal and legitimized the Helghast economy. Now ships from neutral planets, off-world corporate agents, and even the shadowy Vectan intermediates began arriving, not in secret but openly. The station's cargo arms swung to life. The customs bays buzzed with trade, and the red glare of the Triad banner flew above every docking corridor. The turning point came when the Independent Colonial Strategic Alliance, a loosely affiliated non-allied organization of colonies, reached out to the Helghan administration with an offer that would change everything. The deal was simple. Helghan would provide energy cells, refined ore, and synthetic materials. The ICSA would offer hard currency, open trade corridors, and diplomatic recognition. Visari, this was more than profit. It was legitimacy. The contract was signed with great ceremony at the exchange hub, witnessed by both Helghan High Command and ICA envoys. Let this be known, Visari declared before the cameras. Helghan does not crawl to earth for scraps. We stand, and others come to us. By the end of 2351, the industrial output surged, as renewed income allowed the replacement of long-degraded equipment. Wages stabilized, rations improved, and construction projects resumed across Pyrrhus and the southern cities. For the first time in nearly a century, Helghans were employed to build rather than repair, to export rather than scavenge. The Helghan Central Bureau officially declared the end of the economic depression. In public speeches, Visari referred to this event as the Ascension, a term quickly adopted by the state media. What has begun as a black market workaround had evolved into a sovereign trade empire, powered by discipline, sacrifice, and unyielding ambition. Behind every shipment of Helghan steel and fuel, unseen but unmistakable, loomed the growing shadow of the Helghast war machine, quietly rearming beneath the glow of economic recovery. Scholar Visari, now nearly a decade into his reign, had rebuilt more than the Helghan's economy. He had reconstructed its will, rearmed its legions, and rekindled its identity. And now, standing before a crowd of thousands, gathered beneath the blood-red banners of the Helghast Triad, he revealed the final phase of his plan. The system is out of balance. Vecta, stolen from us by liars and parasites, thrives off the blood of the Helghan labor. But I tell you now, the reckoning is at hand. We will return, and this time, we do not ask, we take. The words struck like thunderclap across the Helghan society. In Visari's eyes, Vecta was not merely a memory. It was a wound, and it will only be healed by the flag of the Helghas blown above its glass towers once more. Visari's announcement was far more than symbolic. He openly dismissed UCN's claims of Vectan sovereignty, calling these settlements a colonial stain upon Helgha's dignity. He invoked the names of millions of exiled from Vecta, their deaths romanticized as martyrs in the cultural myths of the Helghan youth. More importantly, he framed the coming campaign as righteous proclamation, the return of Helghan's sons and daughters to their ancestral home. This speech, broadcast across the system, became known as the Vow of Vecta. Within hours, the Helghan High Command met in emergency sessions. The military, newly embodied by years of reorganization and economic fuel, declared unanimous support for Visari's crusade. The most radical declaration came from the Grand Marshal Radek, commander of the Helghast army, who proclaimed, "We are to set foot again on Vecta and hold it in your name. Let the world know this truth. You are no longer autarch. You are emperor." So the title of Emperor Visari became more than a whisper among loyalists. It became a conditional coronation, a sword hanging above the stars, waiting to fall with the taking of Vecta. The Helghast war machine began to shift into final gear. Factories moved from export to mobilization. Transport ships were quietly retrofitted for troop deployment. Intelligent operatives went dark. Propaganda lit the skies with messages of vengeance and destiny. On Vecta, rumors spread, but the ISA command, fragmented and complacent of decades of political peace, dismissed them as noise from a world that had already lost once. They didn't know that Visari never saw Helghan as the end, only the beginning. We were exiled not to be forgotten, but to be reborn. And now we rise, not as beggars, but as conquerors. At the dawn of the third day of August, the skies above Vecta darkened, not with storm clouds, but with the silent burn of re-entry vectors and the long shadows of Helghast warships. The invasion had begun. Emperor Visari, true to his oath, split his military into two devastating thrusts. The First Fleet, a battle-hardened armada under Admiral Stratson, was dispatched to engage and neutralize ISA Navy orbiting Vecta. These ships were fast, agile, and fitted for deep space combat. Their purpose was simple: eliminate the outer shield before the dagger was driven in. The Second Fleet, commanded by General Adams, carried the bulk of the Helghast army. Its transports were reinforced with drop armor, atmospheric thrusters, and orbital deployment platforms. Their destination? Vecta's surface. Together, these two spearheads formed the tip of Operation Deliverance, the cultivation of nearly 20 years of planning. The UCA scouting patrol, far from Helghan space, intercepted distorted transmissions and scrambled data relays, just enough to piece together that something massive was in motion. Patrol relayed a warning beacon to the ISA High Command in Vecta, but the message came too late. By the time Vecta's orbital defenses registered the first gravitational displacements of Helghast capital ships dropping out of slipspace, the ISA fleet was already surrounded. What followed was not a battle, it was a massacre. The Helghan First Fleet jammed long-range communications, blinding Vecta satellites. Orbital rail cannons and plasma lances tore through the aging ISA cruisers. Command ships were disabled within minutes, scattering the rest of the fleet into chaotic, isolated skirmishes. Entire squadrons of Helghast fighters swept in like razor flocks, targeting escape pods and disabled craft alike. By the time the first dropships began atmospheric entry, Vecta's skies were ablaze with falling wreckage. The stunning speed and brutality of the assault shook the UCN Senate from its long complacency. Within hours of confirmation that Vecta was under siege, the Senate converged on an emergency vote. The result was unanimous. Dispatch a heavy fleet. Vecta must not fall. The sector must not be destabilized. The UCA Navy, once dormant, was now mobilizing its full might. Warships, carriers, troop transports, and utility barges. While the distance to Vecta was vast, reinforcements would take weeks to arrive. By then, the Helghast would already be on the ground. The Helghast invasion of Vecta had moved with terrifying speed, cutting down the ISA fleet and establishing multiple ground footholds across the planet. Vecta City, jewel of the outer colonies and seat of the ISA power, stood on the brink of collapse. But amidst the chaos, four unlikely figures emerged: Templar, Luger, Velasquez, and Haka, who would turn the tide of the war's opening chapter. As the Helghast forces encircled Vecta City, pouring in from breach points and orbital drop sites, Jan Templar, an elite ISA captain, coordinating a desperate guerrilla defense, With the city's command chain broken and panic spreading among civilians and soldiers alike, Templar Squad became the last functioning spear point of the ISA resistance in the capital. Over the course of several bloody days, they repelled Helghan's assault teams, detonated key supply lines, and destroyed artillery positions targeting evacuation routes. Luger, a shadow operative, executed a series of surgical infiltration strikes on Helghan's strongholds within the city. Rico, heavy weapons specialist, led direct counter-assaults on armored columns moving towards civilian zones. And most shockingly, Colonel Gregor Haka, a Helghan's intelligence officer and Adam's former aide, defected to the ISA, revealing crucial attack vectors and codes, saving thousands of lives in the process. Together they halted the fall of Vecta City, securing it just long enough for Earth's fleet to arrive. In the shadows of this heroism, the deeper rot was revealed. General Adams, former ISA commander and trusted war hero, was unmasked as the architect of the Helghan's initial success. His betrayal had allowed the enemy fleet to bypass early warning networks and disable key defenses before the first shot was even fired. Templar's team, aided by Haka's intelligence, infiltrated the massive orbital weapons platform Emmett Adams had commandeered, uncovering his plan to ambush the incoming UCA reinforcements from Earth. In a harrowing sequence, the team sabotaged the orbital platform's main reactor, fought to Helghan's commandos guarding Adams' command bridge, and ultimately triggered a self-destruct sequence, ensuring the platform would never fire. Adams was killed in the blast, his betrayal extinguished with him. Despite the heavy blows, the Helghan's invasion was not fully repelled. Vast swaths of Vecta's outer territories remained under Helghan control. Helghan's command, though rattled and endured, General Stratson, Visari's naval mastermind, managed to keep his infiltration and espionage networks intact. His loyalty to Helghan's empire still hidden from the UCN's eyes. But the ISA had survived. Vecta City still stood, and the people of Vecta had witnessed true resistance. They came for vengeance. We gave them hell. Vecta's not broken, and neither are we. With the Helghan's invasion of Vecta stalled but far from defeated, and orbital supremacy only narrowly secured, the ISA Council conveyed in a state of unprecedented crisis. The Helghan, though bloody, still held vast stretches of the southern Vecta, entrenching themselves in forests, mountains, and city ruins. Their lines were tightening, the resolve had not wavered, and now they had a new leader. The shuttle pierced the Vectan atmosphere and touched down at the forward Helghan's command post. From its ramp stepped General Armin, a brutalist tactician, handpicked by Visari for his unwavering loyalty and skill in urban suppression. Where Lent led with fire and fury, Mitrik led with steel and silence. His first act was to unify the scattered Helghan's battalions, absorbing rogue units and deserters into a centralized southern stronghold. It became clear the Helghan's were regrouping, and they were learning from their mistakes. In orbit, the ISA Council took drastic action. The development of a second orbital defense platform, previously intended to secure Vecta's skies permanently, was halted after the trauma of the first platform's capture by the Helghan's forces. The psychological blow had made the Council wary of investing in another potential liability. Instead, the conversation turned nuclear. In a classified emergency briefing, General Dwight Stratson, still a trusted figure among the ISA leadership, put forward a grim proposal. Helghan forces had dug in. They were not moved by infantry or air power alone. We must consider total purging, a nuclear resolution, tactical warheads, precision delivered. We call it Radiant Sweep. The weapons are already being assembled at Rayhoven Base, a secure remote ISA facility deep in the eastern mountains. The nukes were small yield, designed for bunker busting and infrastructure denial rather than planetary annihilation. But they were nuclear all the same. For the ISA Council, Stratson's plan was a devil's bargain, approving the use of nuclear weapons versus political catastrophe, not only within the UCN but neutral colonies watching the conflict closely. The ISA's moral high ground, long taking point in contrast to Helghan's brutality, would be shattered overnight. Yet failing to act could allow Metrak to establish an impenetrable Helghan's republic on Vecta's southern half. The council debate raged behind closed doors, leaked only in fragments. The decision remained in limbo. Meanwhile, Rayhoven Base went on high alert. Warheads were loaded onto mobile transport rigs, and elite ISA teams began running deployment simulations. The nuclear question hovered like a silent specter over the war. Would Vecta be saved or sacrificed? As the leaves turned blood red in Vecta's autumn, the war reached a deadly crescendo. General Armin Metrak, now firmly entrenched in southern Vecta, made his boldest move yet, an all-out assault on Rayhoven Base, the ISA's most secretive weapons research and nuclear deployment facility. At that same moment, the ISA Council, housed at Rayhoven's fortified command spire, was locked in a fractured high-stakes vote on whether to authorize General Stratton's Radiant Sweep to tackle a nuclear response to crush Helghan's entrenchments. The Helghan attacked first. Metarak's forces, led by elite shock troopers and reverse-engineered ISA stealth tech, struck with surgical precision. Perimeter defensive towers disabled remotely using access codes lifted during the earlier sabotage campaigns. VTOL landing craft deployed squads directly onto the southern tower, bypassing ground defenses entirely. Inside, the ISA scientists and politicians were taken hostage or executed. Rayhoven was falling, but salvation came not from above, but within. Captain Jan Templar, now regarded as the face of the ISA war effort, was en route to reinforce Rayhoven. Joined by Sergeant Rico Valquez, his unshakable partner. Landing under fire, they fought through wave after wave of Helghas occupation forces. Alongside scattered ISA defenders and resistant holdouts, they launched a furious counter-assault, culminating in a deep infiltration of Meltrak's forward command post, built into nearby cliffs. The battle was brutal and personal. Templar gunned down Meltrak's personal guard. Rico detonated the base's power core. General Meltrak was killed, his body recovered in smoldering ruins. Rayhoven had been retaken. Yet amid the celebration, the deeper betrayal unraveled. Evidence recovered from Meltrak's field command revealed encrypted transmissions and transaction records, directly implicating General Dwight Stranson as a Helghas collaborator. His betrayal had been complete. The proposed nuclear warheads were never meant for the ISA. Stranson had designed the plan's political smokescreen to justify arming the Helghas under ISA noses. Weapons designed by Dr. Evelyn Batten, a leading ISA researcher, had also been siphoned from Rayhoven's vaults during the attack. These included plasma disruption rifles, active camouflage prototypes, and field disruptor artillery. Stranson attempted to flee but was apprehended by Rico during the post-battle sweep. Templar in his official report stated, General Stratton nearly handed the Helghas the means to the end, not just the war but Vecta itself. He wore our uniform, but he bled for the enemy. Though Rayhoven base was saved, the damage was done. The Helghas now possessed nuclear weapons. Meltrak was dead, but his legacy lived on in war machines not pointed back at Vecta. Visari's regime celebrated the liberation of Rayhoven's arsenal as a historic triumph of Helghas ingenuity over colonial arrogance. The ISA Council, shamed and fractured, suspended all nuclear development, and the base began anew whether any war, no matter how just, was worth the price they were now being asked to pay. And far to the north, under Helghan banners, the war engines began to move once more. The war-torn fields of Vecta had known no sound since the Helghas first breached the skies. Yet by opening weeks of 2358, their banners were fading like smoke in the snow. The remnants of Meltrak's forces, leaderless but not aimless, began withdrawing from the southern strongholds, abandoning bunkers, siege crawlers, and fortresses. But the retreat was strategic, not desperate. The Helghas, unwilling to forfeit their hold on Vecta entirely, turned to covert extraction, using hired bounty hunters, smugglers, and black market freighters. They began to exfiltrate troops and war material back to Helghan. ISA intelligence struggled to pin down the operation, until Sergeant Rico's team intercepted a rogue transmission during a strike against the Helghas convoy. The source, an escaping Helghas cruiser, camouflaged as a civilian relief ship. Templar authorized Rico and his squad to intercept the cruiser in orbit before it breached Helghas space. They boarded it in mid-flight. Inside, the team uncovered a buried payload of stolen ISA encryption codes, plus a full log of Helghas deployment routes. But one file, buried deeper, changed everything. An unexecuted directive, Operation Ash Rain, a coordinated final sought using every remaining Helghas force on Vecta, launched from secret staging grounds across the northern plains. It was to be a last desperate blow meant to cripple ISA infrastructure, destroy supply depots, and kill as many soldiers and civilians as possible before withdrawing. There was no time to deliberate. Within 72 hours, the ISA command mobilized. A coalition of battle-hardened regiments, air support wings, and armored divisions converged on the snowy expanse of Vecta's north. The final battle was a frozen apocalypse. Helghas artillery bunkers emerged from beneath the snow, launching volleys as dropships blackened the skies. ISA tanks countercharged, churning frozen soil and plowing through ambush lines. Valquez and Templar led from the front, rallying the shattered guard as Helghas mechs and suicide squads poured down. For 12 grueling hours, the plains burned. When the sun rose, there was no Helghas left alive. Operation Ash Rain had been stopped before it began. With Vecta secure, the UCA fleet, sent from Earth nearly a year earlier, finally withdrew. But they did not leave without imposing judgment. The ISA was ordered to restore Helghan's blockade, sealing Helghan's orbit from new incursions for trade. No offensive operations would be conducted against Helghan without UCN Senate approval. A Judge Advocate General's Inquisition team would arrive within the month to investigate the nuclear weapon debacle at Greyhaven, the General Stratton affair, and the conduct of ISA forces during the occupation and defense of Vecta. The war was over, but the reckoning had only just begun. And deep in the mists of Helghan, a wounded empire licked its wounds, swearing vengeance in silence. Smoke had barely cleared over the northern plains of Vecta's surviving leaders, generals, and political stewards conveyed inside the hardened bunkers beneath Vecta's city's Hall of Unity. There was no celebration, only a cold reckoning. Though victorious, the ISA now faced a fractured mandate. The UCA had forbidden further offensive action without UCN approval. The Judge inquiry loomed on the horizon, ready to dissect every decision made in defense of the colony. And yet, Scholar Visari still lived. In Helghan, now armed with nuclear capability, remained a festering powder keg just beyond blockade range. The question at the heart of the meeting was simple. Do we finish the war or wait for Visari to bring it back to our doorstep? Despite cautionary voices urging restraint, the majority of the council voted in favor of continued military action. Their rationale was brutal, pragmatic, and born of deep distrust towards the UCN. Many feared that the UCN sought a political scapegoat, not peace. Some suspected the UCA and UCN would use the Inquisition to offload blame for the Helghan's original mistreatment, blame that would fall on Vecta's shoulders. Thus, they chose to act quietly, swiftly, and without Earth's blessing. The Council drafted what would become known as the Vecta Directives, a secret military doctrine authorizing the following immediate goals: neutralize the Helghan threat, capture or eliminate Visari, restructure Helghan rule. All of this was to be done without drawing the UCN's eyes, a delicate game of shadows and deniability. Officially, the ISA returned to a defensive posture, citing the restored blockade as their final act. Unofficially, troop transports were loaded, Black Ops teams were activated, and Helghan space was to be chartered for incursion. The war for Vecta had ended, but the war for Helghan had just begun. The clouds above Vecta boiled with the roar of engines as the ISA fleet launched into the black, cutting across the silence of space like an arrow loosed in the defiance of gods. The operation, codenamed Archangel, was a culmination of months of secret preparation, a violation of UCN directives, and a daring attempt to end the war by striking at the heart of Helghan itself. It would become known as the most complex and high-risk military operation in human history. The objective was both surgical and absolute: penetrate Helghan's orbital defenses, deploy ground forces at key planetary sectors, capture Visari, avoid outright planetary annihilation, ensure complete success. The ISA High Command authorized the use of orbital insertion pods, stealth corvettes, automated heavy armor, and a wave of space superiority fighters, all coordinated by a fleet-wide AI battle network named Nexus Grid. It was a masterpiece of logistics, and yet one teetering on the edge of disaster. ISA commanders knew what they were up against. Helghan's volatile atmosphere and unpredictable weather patterns had crushed previous drone and recon attempts. Helghan had fortified mountain strongholds, installed anti-orbital artillery, and repurposed derelict industrial zones into bunkered cities. And worst of all, the terrain itself, scarred by storms, toxic winds, and lethal radiation, was more enemy than environment. Still, the ISA pressed forward. Fleet Admiral Yeager, commanding the task force from the flagship Horizon Break, delivered a final speech before launch. We do not strike Helghan for vengeance. We strike so this war ends on our terms. Let the Helghast learn that no bunker is deep enough, no mask thick enough, and no tyrant permanent. The first wave broke into Helghan space under heavy fire. The orbital defense satellites opened up, raking ISA cruisers and transports. Cloaked corvettes engaged in micro dogfights amidst ion turbulence. ISA frigates deployed planetfall insertion pods, raining soldiers onto the surface like metal hail. By the end of the day, the ISA had established 6 footholds across Helghan's surface, but they came at a heavy cost. 2 frigates were lost, over 400 casualties were reported from failed drop pods. And yet, the ISA was on Helghan, the first boots on the ground in what would be promised as a brutal campaign. Above them, the storm clouds gathered. Below, the Helghast stirred in fury. The 12 battlegroups thundered into Helghan orbit, their hulls scorched from weeks of attrition, atmospheric shock, and relentless Helghast resistance. At their head was Battlegroup Mandrake, a juggernaut of men and metal led by the vulnerable ISA cruiser New Sun, the last warship to escape the first battle of Vecta, now reborn as a symbol of vengeance. At its helm stood Colonel John Templar, the war hero who had once led the ragged squad to stop a Helghast invasion on his homeworld. Now he was entrusted with the campaign that could end the war in a single stroke. Cyrus was more than a city, it was a fortress, carved into the poison rock of Helghan's southern hemisphere, protected by kilometers of entrenchments, shield generators, and laid artillery fields. Every ally was a kill box, every factory a bunker. But it was also Helghan's greatest vulnerability. The city was a seat of government and propaganda, from which Visari broadcasted his iron rhetoric. It was an economic linchpin with half the planet's trade routed through its fortified docks. It was also the culture heart of the world, where the Helghast masses rallied behind the black and red banners of the Triad. I say High Command believed that if the city fell, Helghan would fracture. In the black winds of Helghan's upper atmosphere, Mandrake's dropships peeled away from the new sun, burning down through the lightning-choked skies as orbital bombardments silenced enemy flak towers. Thousands of troops began their assault. ISA commandos infiltrated ahead of the main force, disabling key power stations. Legionnaire divisions began pushing in from the east and northeast, storming outposts and trench lines. Resistance was ferocious. Helghast shock troops, the Black Guard, met the invaders with flamecasters, railguns, and fortified mechs. The city did not break, it bled. Templars landing with the third wave transmitted a message back to High Command. The other districts are amazed of steel and fire. We're taking ground, but every street cost 100 lives. Still, we're moving forward. Visari knows we're here, and I intend to knock on his door. As ground forces tore into the outskirts of the city, skies above Helghan became a raging crucible of light and ruin. The ISA Navy, riding high in the momentum from Operation Archangel, had committed fully to orbital dominance. With New Sun leading the charge, they drove their warships into formation above the city, like steel titans drawing swords across the sky. Opposing them was the last of Helghan's defense fleet. Older, smaller, and vastly outgunned, but the Helghast, true to form, did not yield. The ISA dreadnoughts like Vengeance, Oath, and Solar Edge opened the engagement to coordinated plasma barrages and kinetic land strikes, cutting swaths through Helghast frigates and corvettes. Helghast warships, outnumbered and technologically inferior, fought with desperate precision, using erratic attack vectors and sacrificial interceptors to stall the inevitable. Even so, it was a slaughter. Within 4 hours, the ISA Navy had achieved orbital supremacy, drawing nearly 80% of the Helghast fleet and forcing the remainder into retreat or hiding behind the atmosphere. Just as the ISA cruisers began maneuvering to deploy orbital strikes on the inner city, massive blue-white arcs of energy lanced upward from the surface. The ISA fleet had overlooked or underestimated the arc cannons. Positioned beneath the city itself, the arc network consisted of subterranean artillery, hidden in bunkers of industrial rock, shielded by false heat signatures. These anti-orbital energy weapons, remnants of the Helghan Seeker Defense Initiative, fired superhero magnetic pulses that pierced the lower atmosphere and shredded ships with terrifying accuracy. Vengeance's Oath was the first to fall, split in half mid-rotation. Solar Edge lost life support and tumbled, burning into Helghan's storm clouds. By the end of the barrage, 6 capital ships were either destroyed or critically damaged. Templar, watching from the surface, saw the skies flash and fade. Despite the casualties, the ISA retained control of space around Helghan. No Helghast ships would be allowed to leave the system. The reinforcement pipeline was cut off, but the cost had been steep, and worse, the arc cannons were still operational, delaying full orbital bombardment support for ground forces. Fleet Admiral Yeager's revised orders were grim. No major ships within the arc envelopment. Deploy drone swarms to locate and destroy arc cannon bunkers. Keep the blockade airtight, but expect resistance from the surface every step of the way. As orbital dominance hung by a thread and ISA ground forces struggled to breach deeper into Pyrrhus, the ISA turned to specialists. Black Ops professionals capable of turning the tide in ways sheer power could not. Enter Phantom Talon Corps, an elite Vectan mercenary unit operating on the fringes of official command, known for its lethal precision, discretion, and unwavering commitment for high-risk insertions. The lead operative, Aaron Danner, was assigned a high-priority mission. Infiltrate the city, disable the arc cannon system, open up the skies for the ISA. Danner inserted via stealth pod during the sandstorm blackout, navigating underground utility shafts and derelict industrial zones to reach the arc cannon nexus complex beneath the spire of the city. Fighting through Helghast sentry patrols and automated defenses, Danner succeeded in placing explosive charges among the magnetic coolant arrays of the main power cores. As the charges detonated, the arc network collapsed in a thunderous cascade of electrofeedback, silencing the devastating anti-orbital artillery. A 10-minute window opened for the ISA fleet, to resume orbital fire support and deploy fresh reinforcements. The skies above the city lit up once again, this time with retaliation from the ISA. But Danner's mission wasn't over. Following the Arcana's sabotage, Phantom Talon received urgent intel. The Vecta ambassador to Helghan, Sep Harkin, his wife and his son Justice, were trapped in a diplomatic enclave under siege by Helghan hardliners. With them was Mandor Savic, a Helghast defector and senior scientist tied to Project Escalation, now seeking asylum with crucial intelligence. Danner led a rescue operation through collapsing infrastructure and heavy firefights. The mission failed to fully succeed. Ambassador Harkin and his wife were killed in the chaos, though Justice was recovered by the ISA evac teams. Savic escaped, though separated and rendezvoused with Danner hours later in a drainage tunnel under the city outskirts. There, Savic delivered the bombshell. Savic revealed that General Kartek, one of Visari's most brutal commanders, had revised Project Escalation, a Helghast bioengineering program aimed at weaponizing native Helghan pathogens. The goal? To create a targeted bioweapon lethal to Vectans but harmless to the Helghast, and purify it through death, a genetic declaration of supremacy. The prototype strain was rumored to be near deployment. Facilities hidden in Helghan's equatorial trench zones. Savic's warning was chilling. If Kartak unleashes this, the city will just be the beginning. The siege of Pyrrhus had evolved into a slow, grinding urban war, a brutal contest fought block by block, sewer to spire. The ISA's armored divisions would bog down in the city's labyrinth industrial sectors, where every hallway became a gauntlet and every rooftop a sniper's perch. The ISA troops advanced under concentrated plasma motors, cloaked assassins, and suicide units who detonated themselves amongst supply lines. The Helghast, though steadily pushed back, fought with fanatic intensity, rallying under the banners of duty, obedience, and loyalty, refusing to retreat without leaving scorched earth behind. Casualties mounted by the thousands, entire districts returned to ash. Glass and steel tombs echoed with gunfire and screams. Commanders on both sides began to speak of Pyrrhus as not just a city, but as a meat grinder. Just as the ISA began to edge towards the central administration zone, a new horror unfolded. Colonel Radek, Visari's black-clawed enforcer and commander of the Helghan Special Forces, revealed his own masterstroke. As the ISA's 3rd Mechanized Infantry advanced into what they thought was a secure corridor, Reg triggered a dormant network of arc towers buried beneath the heart of Pyrrhus. They weren't the same orbital-scale arc cannons previously destroyed. These were localized defense pylons, powered by Helghan's geothermal cores. Each tower emitting high-energy bursts, frying electronics, disabling armored units, and vaporizing infantry squads with terrifying precision. The tower's shielding systems are hardened against orbital fire, rendering them almost invulnerable from above. The ISA's momentum ground to a halt. Forward units were isolated and picked off. Entire battalions had to retreat. The arc towers created zones of death, cleaving the city into impassable sectors. Templar issued an emergency transmission. "The big funnel of Reddick's bleeding us dry. If we don't take those towers offline, we'll never reach the palace, and we'll never reach Visari." Behind front lines, Reddick's legend grew. Soldiers spoke of him moving through smoke with inhuman calm, executing traitors, rallying fanatics, and leading assaults personally with brutal efficiency. The man wasn't just defending Pyrrhus, he was turning it into a weapon. The siege of the city ongoing, Aaron Danner was once again deployed by Phantom Talon Corps, this time into the heavily fortified Kartak-controlled industrial zone. His mission? Infiltrate and shut down a petraite reactor. The volatile energy core used to power Kartak's military facilities, and more dangerously, research infrastructure supporting Project Escalation. Fighting through Helghast mechanized forces, defense drones, Danner managed to plant explosive charges among the central cooling chamber, initiating a core shutdown. With power severed, dozens of Kartak's installations across the sector went dark. But Danner's success would be his undoing. Upon exfiltration, he rendezvoused with Phantom Talon agents Bennett and Gray, supposed allies. Instead, they turned on him. "You say too much, Aaron," Gray said coldly, raising his weapon. "You weren't supposed to know the failsafe targets. Not all of them." They left Danner bleeding in the rubble. Reactors, aftershock burning the sky red. Unconscious and presumed dead, Danner was found by the last person he expected, Colonel Kartak. Danner awoke in a mobile Helghast field lab, surrounded by Kartak's personal guards. The Helghast warlord, known for cruelty and fanatical devotion to Visari, surprised Danner. Not with the bullet, but with the revelation. "Gray is now trying to end the war," Kartak growled. "She's trying to end us all. Project Escalation was never designed to save Helghan. It was rewritten to purge it." According to Kartak, Gray had re-engineered the bioweapon, using Savic's stolen genome mapping. He targeted the mutate physiology of modern Helghast. Her intention? Destroy the Helghast race before another war could develop. Even Visari had never intended genocide of his own people. Faced with annihilation, Kartek proposed an unlikely alliance. You want justice, mercenary? Then help me stop her. Help me save what's left of Helghan from Earth's sphere. With no love for either side, the vengeance burned in his chest. Danner accepted. He will walk into hell again, but this time, not for money. High above the scorched skyline of Pyrus, the ISA flagship New Sun had a precarious command position, coordinating strikes, supporting ground forces, and monitoring Helghas troop movements. It was the nerve center of Operation Archangel, and a symbol of ISA might. But Colonel Radek had other plans. Using a stolen ISA clearance code, acquired during the early sabotage of Rayhoven base, Radek led a covert Helghas strike force aboard the New Sun. Hidden within a salvaged transport vessel, they breached the hangar bays under the cover of jamming fields and plasma interference. What followed was a massacre. The ISA security forces were overwhelmed by Radek's elite Black Guard, and in the carnage, the legendary colonel personally fought his way to the bridge, cutting down every defender with ruthless precision. On the command deck, Colonel Jan Templar stood his ground. Badly wounded and outnumbered, Templar faced off against Radek in a brutal close-quarters combat battle, though Templar fought valiantly. Radek prevailed, delivering a killing blow to the ISA commander. With the bloody colonel at his feet, Radek retrieved the nuclear command codes to the Red Dust warheads, Earth-manufactured atomic weapons that had been smuggled onto Helghan as a last resort. The threat of mass destruction was now in Helghan hands, but Templar wasn't finished. With his last breath, Templar locked out the remote navigational controls and rerouted the New Sun's engines. Alarms screamed as the massive warship began a terminal descent, directly into the parasite distribution grid that powered the city's arc towers, shields, and orbital defense systems. The New Sun plummeted like a comet, breaking apart in the atmosphere, and crashed into the heart of the Helghas power grid. A chain reaction followed. Massive blackouts spread across the city. Arc towers went silent, their energy lifelines vaporized. The city's anti-orbital network collapsed, exposing it to the ISA strikes. Colonel Radek escaped in a dropship, clutching the nuclear codes. But the city was now vulnerable. The sacrifice of Templar had turned the tide again. Though the ISA had lost a hero, they gained a window. One last chance to end the war before Red Dust turned the skies of Helghan permanently red. With the city in blackout and Helghas defenses in disarray, the last and deadliest chapter of the war played out far from the eyes of soldiers and generals. Deep beneath the radioactive waste sealed within 100 meters of parasite-veined rocks lay Facility XL1, the heart of Project Eschaton. And it was no longer a secret. Determined to claim the bioweapon for her own ends, Admiral Evelyn Gray, architect of the virus, launched a covert strike on Facility X1 with her loyal enforcer Bennett. Their goal was clear: retrieve the virus and use it as leverage to end the war. Perhaps to reshape the postal order to their own design. But someone else was already there. Danner, bloody by betrayal and bonded in vengeance, he had tracked Gray down to the facility, accompanied by Justice Harkin, the orphan son of murdered Vecta ambassador. Danner had one goal: end Eschaton, no matter the cost. Within the cryogenic labs of X1, Gray and Benoit reached the containment vaults. So did Danner. What follows a brutal firefight in the compressed, low-oxygen corridors of the facility. Gray, wielding a prototype pulse weapon, activated defense drills to cover escape. Benoit hunted Kratak through the lower levels, eventually killing the Helghas commander in a savage brawl. Danner, wounded and outgunned, still pressed forward. In the heart of the reactor chamber, Danner confronted Admiral Gray, holding a vial of the virus that could erase an entire people. In a final act of defiance, he gunned her down, the blast sent her falling into the toxic coolant below. But it wasn't over. Benoit, seeing Gray's death as the end of his own legacy, turned on Danner. The battle was ferocious, brutal, hand-to-hand, steel and fists echoing through the labs. Danner killed Benoit, choking the life from him with his bare hands, ending the last of Gray's conspirators. With Facility XL1 collapsing and the reactor nearly overloaded, Danner destroyed the remaining samples of the virus, choosing to eliminate the weapon rather than to risk it falling in others' hands. Grabbing Justus, he escaped aboard a Helghan scout ship, the facility erupting behind them in a plume of white fire. As the ISA's battered but determined forces prepare their final advance to shatter capital Pyrus, victory seemed within reach. Colonel Jan Templar's sacrifice had silenced the Arc Towers. Orbital dominance had been secured, and the Imperial Palace, seat of the Helghas regime, laid exposed. But Visari was not yet done. From within the bowels of the Imperial Palace, Scholar Visari watched the ISA encroachment with cold, measured fury. His scientists, under the watch of the late Admiral Gray, had finally completed the weapon once meant to be a failsafe. Red dust, the reprogrammed Terra nuclear arsenal Templar had died to keep from the Helghan's hands. Now it was the last guard he left. If they are to take our capital, Visari had said to his remaining war council, they will take it from the ashes. With chilling precision, Visari authorized the deployment of red dust, targeting the heart of Paharis, precisely where the bulk of the ISA force was massing their push for the Palace District. Detonation was immediate and catastrophic. Tens of thousands of ISA troops were vaporized in a flash of unholy light. The center of the capital was flattened, turned into a scorched crater of blackened steel and liquefied stone. Fallout raced through the ruins, irradiating swaths of the city and choking the skies with ash. It was a decisive blow, not only tactically, but psychologically. Visari had turned his capital into a grave to deny the ISA their prize. But not all was lost. Far beyond the reaches of the blast radius, in the Helghan's desert waste, Captain Jason Narville and a small ISA contingent had been conducting emergency rescue and reconnaissance operations, locating survivors from previous orbital drops and black site skirmishes. The blast lit the sky like a false dawn. They nuked their own capital, Narville muttered in disbelief, staring at the rising mushroom cloud. They nuked their own damn city. Rallying whatever survivors he could find, ISA infantry, medics, engineers, even wounded officers, Narville began the impossible. An all-or-nothing march back towards the palace to strike at Visari, while the regime reeled from its own devastation. With grit and desperation, and no support from orbit, they moved under the cover of ash storms and broken terrain, pushing for the citadel that now stood like a ghost town on the edge of ruin. The ISA had been broken, but it was not yet defeated. As Captain Narville's ragged force approached the palace, only one objective remained: capture Visari, alive or dead. The air over Pyros was shimmed with radiation and fire when Captain Jason Narville's battered ISA contingent reached the walls of the Imperial Palace. The Gothic sprawl of black steel and crimson banners still defined in its silhouette. At the gates, Colonel Radek's Palace Guard, the last elite force of the Helghan's military, stood ready in fanatical defense. What followed was a battle of attrition, a brutal firefight in the Grand Courtyard, with ISA forces, lacking armor and air support, fought inch by inch with grit and desperation. Radek himself commanded from the front, his presence turning each Helghan squadron into a wall of steel. But Narville's troops, driven by vengeance and lost, slowly pushed the defenders back towards the palace's monumental gates. In the final assault, Radek made his last stand at the threshold, holding the massive doors while ordering his last bodyguards to shield Visari. He fell in a storm of bullets, honored, feared, and unmourned by those who felled him. The doors shattered open. Two soldiers from Alpha Squad, Captain Thomas and Sergeant Rico, were the first to enter the throne room. There, seated on his iron throne, surrounded by ashes in his empire, sat Visari, calm, composed, and unarmed.
Scholar Visari! Scholar Visari, I'm placing you under arrest under Article 27.
And who are you, soldier?
Savchenko. Sergeant, first class.
They send a sergeant to take Visari? Are your commanders really all so afraid?
War's over, Visari. You lost.
Really, Sergeant? And who won? The cowards who commanded you and your comrades here to die? The Helghast have lost nothing. We fight for who we are. We wear our wounds like badges of honor. Helghan is ours, and we will die before we let it fall to plunder us. That is why your leaders dare not make a martyr of me. Your fleet burned, your friends butchered, and you become a hero for saving my life? Does that sound like a victory to you, Sergeant Savchenko?
Son of a bitch. Good men have died, and I'll see you rot in a cell for it. You'll pay for what you've done!
For giving my people pride, purpose. We have built this great nation from nothing. Take me, and Helghan will dissolve into chaos. The ISA war machine, powerless against the sheer will of my people. We will choke the streets with our dead before we surrender. Your masters will beg me to restore order. You have not won! You will never go! No! Madness. Madness begins.
Unbeknownst to the ISA, Visari had made a contingency plan. Above Helghan, cloaked in sensor-dampering interference left by the red dust blast, Helghan's first army had arrived in orbit. Massive dreadnoughts and assault carriers descended upon the ISA fleet without warning. The resulting ambush was a massacre. The ISA cruisers were torn apart in minutes. Orbital defense platforms, never restored after Templar's sacrifice, offered no cover. Escape routes were cut off. The ISA Navy was annihilated. With their ships gone and no communications to Earth, their surviving ISA forces were trapped. Stranded on a hostile planet, surrounded by an enemy that had only grown more fanatical in the wake of Visari's death. Now leaderless, hunted and cut off, the remnants of the ISA invasion force scattered, turning into guerrilla resistance in Helghan's wastelands. For 6 long months after the death of Visari, the scattered remnants of the ISA invasion force had clung to survival across the irradiated ruins and hostile wastelands of Helghan. Constantly hunted, starving, and outmatched, they moved like ghosts through ash-choked valleys and cities devoured by civil unrest. But from the ashes they found one sliver of hope. Led by Captain Thomas and Sergeant Rico, the ISA survivors seized control of Helghan's Orbital's transfer station. Abandoned by overstretched Helghan's forces as civil war erupted across the planet. Visari's death had created a power vacuum, and now 2 titans, Admiral Orlok of the Helghan's Navy and Chairman Jorhan Stahl of Stahl Arms, vied for absolute control. It was this infighting that gave the ISA just enough breathing room to act. Hijacking several Helghan strike fighters, the ISA made their move, a daring strike against Stahl's experimental supercruiser. Petraite-powered dreadnought destined to lay waste to Earth. According to stolen intel, Stahl's plan was monstrous, to bombard Earth with hundreds of irradiated petraite warheads, not to conquer, but to cripple and poison the UCN's capital world, triggering mass civilian deaths and a total collapse of UCN resistance. But the ISA struck first. In a desperate and high-speed assault, the stolen strike fighters managed to penetrate the cruiser defenses and ignite a chain reaction in the petraite's warhead storage bays. The resulting explosion didn't just destroy the dreadnought, it detonated its payload above Helghan. The skies of Helghan turned white. The entire planet was irradiated, turning its already harsh environment into a death world. Millions perished instantly, including Stahl, Orlok's naval forces, and the elite regiments preparing for invasion of Earth. The remains of the Helghan's First Army and a civilian population across the capital city, and the surrounding regions were incinerated or slowly cooked by fallout. Helghan was no just longer uninhabitable. It was doomed. Catastrophe will be remembered forever as Tetracide. In the wake of the Petraite cataclysm that scorched Helghan's surface and left the once proud world a lifeless husk, a tragedy later known across the galaxy as Tetracide, the war between the ISA and the Helghans came to an abrupt and bitter end. The cost had been too high, the destruction too complete. With nowhere left to go, the remnants of the Helghans people, battle-hardened, scarred, and burning with resentment, were granted refuge on their former enemy's home world, Vecta. But peace, if it could be called that, was born of necessity, not forgiveness. In a grim compromise, half of Vecta was ceded to the survivors, a scarred swath of territory now renamed New Helghan. It was a colony born not from hope, but of exile, a constant reminder to the Helghans of their lost homeworld, and to the Vectans of a war they believed should have ended with finality. Resentment festered on both sides. Trust was a foreign concept. The ISA, coexistence a fragile illusion. And so, the wall was built. An immense heavily fortified barrier that stretched across continents. A towering monument to fear and division. It didn't just separate two people, it embodied the unhealed wound between them. Despite the ceasefire, the conflict never truly ended. In the shadows beyond the wall, both Vectan and Helghast operatives carried out secretive missions, assassinations, and sabotage. Each side whispered the same truth. The war wasn't over. It had simply changed form. The year is 2370. Tensions simmer beneath the fragile surface of peace. Years after the wall was raised to divide Vecta in half. On one side, gleaming cities and rolling green landscapes. On the other, the scorched steel and red haze of New Helghan. In this divided world, the ISA begins the forced relocation of all Vectans still living within Helghast territory. An operation veiled in order, but laced with fear. Among those displaced is Michael Kellen, a weary father determined to get his young son Lucas to safety. Only 5 years old, Lucas clutches his father's hand tightly as they move through the silent ruins and guarded checkpoints of New Helghan, trying to avoid detection. Every shadow could hold a soldier. Every street corner the end of the journey. Their desperate escape brings them into contact with Thomas Sinclair, a grim and seasoned shadow marshal, a man trained to operate in the gray space between duty and survival. Sinclair sees something in the Kellen family, innocents caught in the crossfire. He agrees to help. As the trio nears the wall, salvation glimmers just ahead, but it comes at a cost. Helghast patrols intercept them in the final stretch. Gunfire erupts. In the chaos, Michael is struck down protecting his son. With ruthless efficiency, Sinclair eliminates the remaining attackers. But it's too late for the father. He kneels beside the child, now orphaned, and solemnly promises, "I'll take care of you." Lucas grows under Sinclair's watchful eye. Entering the Shadow Marshal Academy and during its grueling tests, the scarred child becomes a soldier, a blade in the dark. Years later, he emerges fully grown, a Shadow Marshal in his own right, trained, hardened, and ready to face the ghosts of a divided world. Two decades have passed since Michael Kellen died beneath the shadow of the wall. Now a seasoned Shadow Marshal, Lucas Kellen walks willingly into the Lion's Den. His mission, to gather intelligence from deep within the Helghast territory. Under heavy guard, he marched across the wall as part of his tense prisoner exchange. In return for Kellen, the VSA hands over the Helghast operative, known only as Echo. He goes to war with unknown motives, but the exchange is only the beginning. Upon his return, Kellen receives a new directive from his longtime mentor, Thomas Sinclair: infiltrate New Helghan once more. The intelligence retrieved has uncovered whispers of a classified project, one that could tilt the fragile balance between the two people. His mission? Retrieve the rest of the data and escape undetected. Kellen moves like a shadow through the hostile streets and lockdown sectors. Against overwhelming odds, he uncovers the full breadth of the secret. A biotech weapon, buried beneath layers of encrypted files. With the data secured, he makes a daring escape under fire, narrowly crossing back over the wall. The intel points to the ISC Cassandra, a top-secret research vessel orbiting dangerously close to a nearby sun. At its heart is Dr. Hilary Massar, a brilliant and morally ambiguous scientist tied to the weapon's development. Sinclair orders Kellen to erase every trace of the project by sending Cassandra into the sun itself. Once aboard the doomed vessel, Kellen pushes through the automated defenses and abandoned corridors. But he is not alone. Echo, free and operating on her own agenda, is already on board. She escapes again, this time with Massar in tow, leaving Kellen to finish what he came to do. As the Cassandra begins its terminal descent into the star, Kellen races against time. He escapes just before the vessel is consumed by fire, the last vestige of his terrible secret vanishing in light. But the War of Shadows is far from over. Echo is still out there, and so is Massar. And Kellen has just begun to understand the scale of what lies ahead. When Kellen returns to Vecta, disaster strikes. As he approaches the VSA headquarters, a deafening explosion tears through the heart of the city. Fire and smoke swallow the skyline, screams echo through shattered concrete. Civilians and soldiers alike are caught in a blast, many never see it coming. Amid the chaos, Kellen pushes forward, battered but alive, until he finds Sinclair, bloodied but still standing. Before they can speak, every screen in Vecta flickers to life. A transmission cuts through the static. The face of Vlad Kotaran, leader of the radical Helghast offshoot known as Black Hand, fills the airwaves. Unflinching, he claims responsibility for the bombing, declaring it a warning, a first strike in a war for Helghast sovereignty. The Vectan government reacts with swift, brutal efficiency. In a matter of days, every Helghan citizen still living on the Vecta side of the wall is rounded up and deported to New Helghan. Trucks full of families roll out under armed guard. Tensions ignite into violence in the streets. Amid this, Sinclair formulates a plan. To find Taron, Helghan must disappear, go undercover among the deportees. Stripped of his rank and identity, he is thrown into the refugee convoys. Treated like any other Helghan exile. What follows is a harrowing descent into the underworld of New Helghan. Slums, smuggler tunnels, and whispered names behind locked doors. Eventually, Kellen's hunt leads him to Taron himself. But what he learns is worse than anyone expected. Taron is merely a pawn, a puppet dancing on strings held by Joris Stahl, the infamous weapon industrialist who somehow survived the end of the last war. Hidden in the shadows, Stahl had been quietly repurposing Visari's stolen biotech weapon, altering it to target Vectans exclusively, a weapon of genocide, refined and personalized. Before Kellen can warn anyone, he is captured. Surrounded by Black Hand loyalists and outnumbered, Kellen is thrown to the very nightmare he has sought to prevent. Alone, compromised and at the mercy of enemies who believe their vengeance is righteous. In the cold confines of this cell, Lucas waits, beaten, disarmed, and betrayed. The dim light flickers overhead, the silence broken only by distant voices and the occasional sound of boots on steel. Then the door slides open. Echo steps through, calm and unreadable. But there's something behind her eyes, something different from their last encounter. Kellen wastes no time, he tells her everything. Stahl has the weapon, he modified it to target not only Vectans, but also half-breeds. Those with mixed Helghan heritage. People like Echo. She listens, and the mask begins to slip. Her silence is not indifference, it's anger. Not at Kellen, but at her mother, Lady Hera Visari, the figurehead of New Helghan, now revealed to be Echo's own blood. Echo speaks with a quiet fury, disillusioned that Visari had aligned herself with such a fanatic like Stahl, and is willing to purge their people into another war. Without another word, she disables the cell locks and guides Kellen to freedom. Together they cross over the wall, avoiding patrols and surveillance until they reach Vectan soil. Kellen pleads with Sinclair, begging him to see the truth. Stahl's weapon, Visari's complicity, Echo's help, but Sinclair's expression hardens into stone. He sees only betrayal. You're siding with her? He growls, eyes burning with disbelief. Instead of standing down, Sinclair reveals that Dr. Hilary Massar had been tracked to an enormous mining spire, orbiting the ruins of Helghan. She may still hold the key to stopping the weapon. Sinclair gives Kellen one final chance to prove his loyalty. Bring back the doctor. Kellen infiltrates the orbital spire, cutting through guards and automated defenses. The facility looms like a monument to a dying world, suspended over Helghan's irradiated surface. Deep inside, he finds Massar, frantic and shaken. She confirms his worst fear. The weapon is no longer in her hands. Stahl has it, and final preparations are already underway. Before Kellen can extract her, Echo arrives, her pistol already raised. Without hesitation, she pulls the trigger. Massar collapses in a pool of blood. Kellen stares, stunned and betrayed, but Echo only says she would have finished what she had started. The calm crackles, Sinclair's voice cuts through, cold and final. You're done, Kellen. Now marked as a traitor by the VSA, hunted by the very force he had once served, Kellen has only one path left. Join Echo. The two unlikely allies descend to the ravaged surface of Helghan, united by purpose, if not trust. Above them, Stahl's weapon nears completion. Below them, an entire world burns in the memories of past wars. The scorched winds of Helghan whip across the barren waste as Kellen and Echo descend onto the broken world. Once a home, now a graveyard, its skies dimmed by ash, its ground cracked by the petraite poisoning. The duo move with urgency towards the last known location, Joris Stahl, a fortified base deep within the irradiated husk of a planet. Inside the complex, they confront Flatcoat Taron, the Black Hand commander who orchestrated the bombings of Vecta. Cornered and outmatched, Taron rants of vengeance and salvation, but his reign ends in a flash of gunfire. Kellen and Echo press forward. Over the comms, Kellen radios Sinclair, his voice edged with desperation. Call off the assault. Stahl has the weapon. You'll be walking into a massacre. But Sinclair refuses. We'll just finish what they started. Above them, ISA dropships begin the descent, engines roaring. Within moments, Stahl activates a biotech weapon. A brilliant, terrifying beam of blue light arcs across the sky, slicing through Vectan ships like paper. Explosions ripple across the clouds. The sky ignites. The invasion fleet is obliterated in seconds. The blast throws Echo and Kellen apart in the chaos. Alone now, battered and limping, Kellen pushes deeper into the heart of the base, where he finds Joris Stahl, at last. no longer the towering industrious of old. Stahl is a withered relic, suspended in a life support rig of tubes and machinery, kept alive only by spite and petraite-choked breath. With a sneer, Stahl proclaims his gospel. The weak must fall, just as Helghan did. Vecta will burn, not in revenge, but in balance. But before Kellen can respond, a gunshot rang out. Stahl's skull jerks back, dead. Sinclair enters, pistol smoking, face unreadable. Kellen stares, stunned. What have you done? Sinclair steps forward, his voice calm, almost mournful. We've lost the war when we let them live. Kellen, I'm not making that mistake again. He raises the gun, fires once. Kellen staggers, dropping to his knees, blood soaking through his armor. The world fades at the edges. Sinclair kneels beside him, his voice softer now. You were like a son to me, but you chose the wrong side. A final shot echoes through the chamber. Lucas Kellen, Shadow Marshal, dies in silence, alone, betrayed, and beneath the ashes of a world that never forgave. The weapon is now in Sinclair's hands, and the war is far from over. Over the capital city of Vecta, now tense and militarized. Patrol drones hum overhead. Propaganda banners flutter in the wind. Unity through strength. At the heart of the city, a grand platform has been erected before a sea of citizens and soldiers. Floodlights blaze as Thomas Sinclair, now head of the VSA, steps forward to address the crowd. He speaks with authority, fire in his voice. The Helghast threat must be eliminated. Root and stem, no more walls, no more borders, only victory. But somewhere above, hidden in the shadow of a clock tower overlooking the square, a lone figure moves like smoke through the dark. Wearing stealth gear and moving with purpose, she assembles a sniper rifle with practiced hands. Through the scope she sees Sinclair, standing tall, surrounded by flags and armed guards, the architect of a coming genocide. She breathes slowly, her finger hovers over the trigger. Her voice, quiet and resolute, breaks the silence. For Kellen. A single shot cracks through the night. Sinclair's words die in his throat as he crumbles to the floor. Chaos erupting around him. Screams fill the square. Soldiers scramble, searching the rooftops. But Echo's already gone, swallowed by the city, a ghost once more. A war had been averted. For now.